Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, captain of the tunneling ship Doof.
And I'm Scott Daly, and I'm the token asshole of the crew. I'm sure I'll learn an important message soon.
Yes, that's what this is all about, Scott. It's all about finding our own personal catharsis in this wild universe of ours.
That is true. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope everyone's having a wonderful Friday evening. We're a week late, but that's okay. Hope everyone's enjoying August so far. I'm sure we know a lot of you folks in the chat, but for those that are possibly new and here for the very first time, hello and welcome to the book club. We are part of Doof Media, and we make podcasts all about the stories we love. We also organize and host this monthly live stream book club. We're so excited to be here. Matt, explain what this whole thing is.
Well, each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all the supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, and then we let the patrons vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it.
That is right. And then we meet here on the last Friday of the month and spend a couple hours discussing the book. We pull slides of interesting moments and lead this discussion with all of you. And we see everyone in chat talking away, and that is because this is an interactive discussion. We are going to be leading it. We're going to be reading the slides, but we want to have a conversation with you folks. So thank you all for saying hello. We have Chris here, who's a book club virgin, they say. That's so exciting. Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Hey, John. Hey, Cass. Hey, Miss Evil Doom. Hey, Mike. Hey, Mary. John again. I think there's more than one. There's always. I get confused when people have the same names. How dare you have the same names? Hello, everyone. Hello, Matt. As everyone says hello and greets each other and talks, why don't you talk to us about the book that we're talking about today?
Well, the book that was selected for this month was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, or TLWTASAP, by Becky Chambers.
What? What do you mean, or? No one says that.
They don't? That's not a thing? Okay, anyway. The book is summarized as follows. Rosemary Harper doesn't expect much when she joins the crew of the aging Wayfarer. While the patched-up ship has seen better days, it offers her a bed, a chance to explore the far-off corners of the galaxy, and most importantly, some distance from her past. An introspective young woman who learned early to keep to herself, she's never met anyone remotely like the ship's diverse crew, including Syssix, the exotic reptilian pilot, chatty engineers Kizzy and Jinx, who keep the ship running, and Ashby, their noble captain.
Noble. So noble. There's more, Matt.
There's more. There's more.
Are you
Life
just
aboard
not,
the
are you just not
Wayfarer
reading
is
it?
chaotic and crazy, exactly what Rosemary wants. It's also about to get extremely dangerous when the crew is offered the job of a lifetime. Tunneling wormholes through space to a distant planet is definitely lucrative and will keep them comfortable for years. But risking her life wasn't part of the plan. In the far reaches of deep space, the tiny Wayfarer crew will confront a host of unexpected mishaps and thrilling adventures that force them to depend on each other. To survive, Rosemary's got to learn how to rely on this assortment of oddballs, an experience that teaches her about love and trust, and that having a family isn't necessarily the worst thing in the universe.
What do you feel about that summary, Matt? I think it makes it seem like there's a lot more conflict around Rosemary fitting in with the crew than there actually is. Because I think one thing is very clear, that she just fits right in. Where the lines of conflict are drawn in this book is a really interesting thing that I want to kind of talk about, because it's not where I think you think it was.
I mean, basically, it is a very low conflict story.
Yes.
It is, and also another thing is that it is very much an ensemble character story, where this summary makes it seem like it's just a story about Rosemary. I mean, she's definitely the main character, but we certainly spend quite a lot of time getting to know all the side characters from their own point of view.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read everyone's chat as you were talking. Aaron is also here for the first time. Hello, Aaron. Chris says that Stephen King brought them here, so that's exciting.
That's cool.
It's very, very cool. John says, I thought the book was pretty good for having started as a lusty Argonian-made fanfic. I don't know if you're being serious or not, John. I don't know.
It's impossible to know anymore. Some people are commenting that the pictures of the crew members that we have sort of shown on the screen on the YouTube right now are not how they pictured any of the crew. I think I think I agree, which is kind of fine. I never picture anything the way books describe them. Actually, like
Yeah, I don't
I
either.
I kind of just pictured Sisyx as like a velociraptor with
Yes,
feathers,
exactly, exactly. A
which
velociraptor with
is
some feathers, yeah. Which is
yeah, which I
just
mean
what
I know
velociraptors
there are
have,
more
right?
details to how the her species are supposed to look.
I like this picture though, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the way I imagine things are weird. I don't I forgot we named it when we were doing the Worm podcast of like what the thing is where you just don't visualize stuff in that way, but
Hmm.
I don't remember exactly what it was. But that's kind of how I work in this stuff. So we've already kind of started this conversation, but folks, I want to hear what your overall thoughts about the book were. And as you were doing that, Matt is also going to share his overall thoughts about this book. So Matt, what did you think about The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet?
Well, I love Star Trek. Um, I mean, in all seriousness, this is basically classic sci-fi space opera, where we have our plucky crew navigating the cosmos, having uh, cultural, misunderstandings that lead to a moral,
Uh huh.
basically.
Uh huh.
In fact, the book is very episodic.
It
It
is.
feels like 5 or 6 episodes rather than a novel,
I agree.
which I don't intend as a criticism. It's just that's just what it is. I'm pretty sure it was intended to be that way. Um, I think the character writing is pretty strong. I think the, the ideas are actually very interesting. Like there's in the classic Star Trek fashion, we kind of one at a time will focus on some new scenario of like this species and their bizarre mating habits or whatever it is, usually related to sex. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we consider this new idea, and frankly I think they almost all were either new ideas to me or a fun twist on an idea that I'd seen before. I mean, it's hard to make something really new in at this point in time, but usually she was able to put a spin on things that made it feel fresh to me,
I
and I
agree.
thought that was impressive personally.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. Gosh, we got lots of people in the chat as well saying they agree with your Star Trek comparison. Also, Kristen says, I love Firefly, which Firefly is another really great comparison.
Yeah.
Miss Evil Doom says they really liked it. It was tons of fun and nice to get some classic sci fi, which I think it absolutely was. They're saying this would make a really good season of a TV show. I totally agree with that.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, this is actually a first book in a series, Mary points out, which I don't think I knew when I started reading it, but is the case. This is the Wayfarer series, actually.
yeah. Um, Trinkard says that I thought it was going to try and teach something, but instead it didn't really go anywhere, but had fun in the journey. Yeah, I mean, I think it's teaching. I think that's right. I mean, there's not like a specific, like conclusive theme, but I think it's broadly saying a lot about how people coexist with each
Yeah.
other and how people of differing cultures and ideologies and beliefs can come together to create something bigger than the individual pieces, right?
Yeah, I think the theme was cooperation,
Yeah,
you know. I
definitely.
mean, and I'm sure that we're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about that. It's which is really a similar theme to what is all throughout Star Trek, which is I think why I liked it so much
Yeah,
because Star
yeah.
Trek is all about like we have this crew of people from different backgrounds. They all have their own peccadillos, but they work hard to get along and be understanding of each other and try to not kind of impose their will upon the world as it exists. They try to learn about it and
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even adapt themselves to it. That's classic Star Trek. That's TNG. That's even Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Less so with the ones where it's not like we're just exploring the galaxy and it's
Sure,
episodic.
sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's so funny coming off of a book like Foucault's Pendulum from last month. This is as, I think, far removed from that book in just about every way that you can get. Like we swung wildly in a different direction. This is a much more optimistic book. This is a much simpler, easier read. I really enjoyed my time with this book the entire time. It's a quick read. It's an enjoyable read. There's never a moment where I wasn't enjoying the words on the page. I don't think like this is a story that's going to like change my life, but I certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah, right. That's the one funny thing is like the whole time I was reading it, I was like, you know how when we read like Blindside or Dune, you were like, this is like a book that was written for Matt.
Yeah.
This was not a book that was written for me. um, I tend to like, like darker and more hard sci-fi a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I also like Star Trek. So those are like those are such different things that they I put them on different bookshelves in my brain, even though they're both obviously sci-fi.
Sure.
Um, but this, it's like I appreciate this book, although I never would have written a book like this because it's not kind of the thing I typically
Yeah.
enjoy, but
I mean,
I did enjoy it.
that was kind of my thought going through it, and I think part of what led me to appreciate it so much is like every time I think the book is screaming up to a big climactic conflict moment, it zags when I thought it would zig. And that's what makes it really interesting because I never would have written a book this way. Like I just like the choices that were made here were always interesting to me because like, oh, I really thought we were setting up this to be an actual conflict. Like, I mean, we're going to get into this, but Rosemary's whole secret is like really established from page 1 as like a thing that is going to generate a lot of conflict. And then the resolution of that story is she comes clean and nobody gives a shit. The end. And that's just a fascinating choice.
Yeah, intentional anticlimax, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
she's a good enough writer that she knows that this is, in some sense, like that's it. That's the reaction, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's the point. Actually, is that this this is a crew of caring people who
Mm-hmm.
aren't gonna drum up some conflict just for the
Yeah.
sake of conflict.
Yeah, I gotta say, as we get into this conversation and get into the details, one thing I just want to say up front is I consider myself a pretty optimistic person, generally and about humanity and about people. I think Becky Chambers is way more optimistic about people than I am. Like, I just like think this book is filled with this kind of just makes you feel good about people, not even human beings, but just people broadly, right?
Hmm.
I don't know, just like the back of my mind always like, oh, I love that, but would a person actually behave that way? I don't know. It's so optimistic, and that's refreshing in a lot of ways. But
It's refreshing because I think normally in fiction the tendency is to do the reverse, where it's just like, let's just do the worst shit we can. Let's
mm-hmm.
just drag everyone through the worst things that people do. And I mean, you're almost accused of being naive if you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can appreciate sort of the courage even that it took to write a book like this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. Aaron is saying it does make them feel a little bit sad knowing that the rest of the series does a bit of romance series approach of moving to a different part of the world orbiting around a side character from the previous book. So
Huh.
this is a book in a series, but we don't stick with the crew of the Wayfarer, it sounds like. And they haven't read the next book because they don't want to leave the crew behind, which is, I understand.
Yeah. All right.
All right, so let's, without further ado, let's get into the book itself. And let's begin with our first slide right here, Matt. Take it away.
Yes, as always, we begin with the beginning of the book. As she woke up in the pod, she remembered three things. First, she was traveling through open space. Second, she was about to start a new job, one she could not screw up. Third, she had bribed a government official into giving her a new identity file. None of this information was new, but it wasn't pleasant to wake up to. She wasn't supposed to be awake yet, not for another day at least, but that was what you got for booking a cheap transport. Cheap transport meant a cheap pod flying on cheap fuel and cheap drugs to knock you out. She had flickered into consciousness several times since launch, surfacing in confusion, falling back just as she'd gotten a grasp on things. The pod was dark, and there were no navigational screens. There was no way to tell how much time had passed between each waking, or how far she'd traveled, or if she'd even been traveling at all. The thought made her anxious and sick. Her vision cleared enough for her to focus on the window. The shutters were down, blocking out any possible light sources. She knew there were none. She was out in the open now. No bustling planets, no travel lanes, no sparkling orbiters. Just emptiness, horrible emptiness, filled with nothing but herself and the occasional rock. The engine whined as it prepared for another sublayer jump. The drugs reached out, tugging her down into uneasy sleep. As she faded, she thought again of the job, the lies, the smug look on the official's face as she'd poured credits into his account. She wondered if it had been enough. It had to be. Had to. She'd paid too much already for mistakes she'd had no part in. Her eyes closed. The drugs took her. The pod, presumably, continued on.
All right, so this is our first little bit. It's also our first chapter, and the reason we always pull the first part, and we kind of like to talk about how the first page sets up the book to come. The thing that is so fascinating to me is how this is such a fake out almost of the book to come. Like even the tone of this section seems to be setting up a book that it isn't there. Like I said already, we introduce her big lie that we don't know exactly what it is yet, but we know that she has assumed a new identity. She's lying. We get this line about the scariness and emptiness and horribleness of space, which like it sets up space as like this idea of the cheap transport with the cheap pod and the cheap fuel. It sets up like space as this rickety, uncertain thing that doesn't have any warmth or comfort to it. Like it's setting up a tone of a book that obviously we don't get. And of course this makes perfect sense because this is Rosemary's whole view on this whole thing, and we'll see this fundamentally changed by the end of it.
Yeah, we start out with this tone of profound loneliness. In a word, she's infinitely alone. She's in the blackness of space. The windows are closed. She's alone with her thoughts, and she's being drugged into sleep. It's like the most lonely and isolated possible. Hyper stylization of what it is to be lonely and alone.
Yeah, the shutters were down, blocking out light sources. No light, no anything, just emptiness, horrible emptiness. The whine of the engine, the drugs taking her, like it's all meant to convey this very isolating tone, and it's not the book at all.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because it is. I don't know if I mean this as a criticism or not. I might mean it as a criticism.
Oh, okay.
It's a weird beginning for the book that follows it. And part of me is like, do you just have to begin a book this way so that people will turn the page? Because if you begin a book with like cheerful, optimistic, shiny, happy people holding hands, a lot of people are just going to be like, this sounds boring. Like this sounds like there's not going to be any tension. This like where's the hook, right? We're trained actually, and I think somewhat unfortunately, to kind of require a hook very early, first page,
Sure.
And so the author gives us a hook, even if it's maybe kind of disingenuous, kind of misleading hook. I don't know. Am I being too harsh, Scott?
A little bit. I mean, I think yes, there is some of this that's probably like make sure you hook them in the first page, but I also think, as John has already pointed out, this is a perfect bookend with the final scene of her back out in space again, and her opinion is different. I think we need to understand Rosemary as this person who was not like open and willing to this family that she finds herself in. She's doing it as a fresh start, a way of getting away, a way of getting free of her past, not as a way of finding a home. And we need to understand that point of view. And I think the tone of this and the potential of that conflict really gets us in her headspace.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, to a certain extent, it is a little bit of a bait and switch, but it's a very intentional one. And I mean, like, we're about to move on to another slide that is the next beginning. We kind of get two beginnings. Well, I mean, let me be honest here as we go through. Most of these slides, I pulled like one slide per character because there's so many characters and like each of them goes through their own little thing. So I pulled one slide and we're going to get to talk about that character in that slide. That's kind of the structure of how we're going to do it this time around. But the next one over, and I'll go ahead and transfer us over there right now and we can continue this thought after the slide. But this introduces another area of conflict, this time on the Wayfarer, right? Because we meet Corbin. So let me read this and we can talk about that. Ashby was in his office, reading a news feed over a cup of mech, when one particular sound made him cringe. Footsteps. Corbin's footsteps. Corbin's angry footsteps coming right toward his door. Ashby sighed, swallowed his irritation, and became the captain. He kept his face neutral, his ears open. Talking to Corbin always required a moment of preparation and a good deal of detachment. Artist Corbin was two things, a talented algaist and a complete asshole. The former trait was crucial on a long-haul ship like the Wayfarer. A batch of fuel going brown could be the difference between arriving at port and going adrift. Half of one of the Wayfarer's lower decks was filled with nothing but algae vats, all of which needed someone to obsessively adjust their nutrient content and salinity. This was one area in which Corbin's lack of social graces was actually a benefit. The man preferred to stay cooped up in the algae bay all day, muttering over readouts, working in pursuit of what he called optimal conditions. Conditions always seemed optimal enough to Ashby, but he wasn't going to get in Corbin's way where algae was concerned. Ashby's fuel cost had dropped by 10% since he brought Corbin aboard, and there were few algeists who would accept a position on a tunneling ship in the first place. Algae could be touchy enough on a short trip, but keeping your batches healthy over the long haul required meticulousness, and stamina too. Corbin hated people, but he loved his work, and he was damn good at it. In Ashby's book, that made him extremely valuable. An extremely valuable headache. The door spun open and Corbin stormed in. His brow was beaded with sweat, as usual, and the graying hair at his temples looked slick. The Wayfarer had to be kept warm for their pilot's sake, but Corbin had voiced his dislike for the ship's standard temperature from day one. Even after years aboard the ship, his body had refused to acclimate, seemingly out of pure spite. Corbin's cheeks were red as well, though whether this was due to his mood or from coming up the stairs was anyone's guess. Ashby never got used to the sight of cheeks that red. The majority of living humans were descendant from the Exodus fleet, which had sailed far beyond the reaches of their ancestral sun. Many, like Ashby, had been born within the very same homesteaders that had belonged to their original earthen refugees. His tight black curls and amber skin were the result of generations of mingling and mixing aboard the giant ships. Most humans, whether spaceborne or colony kids, share the nationless Exodan blend. So this passage is pretty long, but it introduces a whole lot of concepts, right? It introduces the use of algae as fuel. It introduces kind of what the human beings are in this world. But of course, the thing to pick up what we were talking about is we have Corbin, the resident asshole of the ship, and we take this time to show he's also a little bit speciesist, I guess you'd call it. He doesn't like how did they say that word actually? Syssix. Okay.
Yeah.
Does not
right,
like
yeah.
Syssix.
We're introducing the idea that this is a multicultural world,
Mm-hmm.
and that the fact of that is going to be central to the storytelling, because indeed it is. I mean, so much of the story is about like, we're going to a new planet. We're going to have to, let's try to understand their customs. Let's try not to offend them. Oh, somebody said the wrong thing. Somebody, committed a faux pas, or like, oh, I really want to make this person feel more included. How? And then of course there are people who are just, speciesist, and the antagonists are basically that, I would say.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense that we're introducing these elements of conflict. It's funny because I don't think the book doesn't have conflict. I think it's just like the conflict is this fairly abstract thing, which is like the ongoing, unceasing sort of low-grade conflict that everyone is experiencing all the time as they try to navigate a confusing world.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very fun.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing about Corbin and Syssix's conflict here that was set up in the very beginning, it's really not what you think it is. Like, it is not them unable to work together because of his racism or speciesism or what have you, and that leads to problems on the ship. It's actually, the conflict is, oh, he needs help, and now you have to go beyond your knowledge of how much he dislikes you because of who you are to show kindness and inclusion to him as well. And that, like, that's again the opposite side of what it seems like at the beginning. Like, you seem like when I first read this part, I remember distinctly remembering, this is going to be trouble. Like, we have these beats early in the story when they agree to take this very, very long trip, this long way, I guess you could say, where they're like, oh, being out in space that long, like it starts to mess with people a little bit. And so you can see, like, as tempers flare, as being isolated and holed up together really rise, like, this is going to come to a head. And it's not that, like, there aren't moments where the book goes into that and says, oh yes, people are fighting, here's conflict. Like, they're starting to get a little stressed and a little more chippy with each other. But that's never like a driving incident of the narrative in and of itself. It's just that the relationships are tested by external events, and these internal inter-ship conflicts are forced to resolve in ways that people either compromise or do the right thing in spite of the feelings that they have.
Yeah. I mean, I think Corbin's arc was one of my favorites simply because it doesn't follow any of the patterns that these sorts of things usually do,
Sure,
right?
sure.
It's like he's the racist jerk. Like, okay, well, then either he's going to like turn into a monster who dies or something, or he is going to have a complete turnaround and just change his ways and just be a completely different person. And it's like, no, he's
Yeah,
kind of still the same person by
yeah,
the end. He's just like, I need to I need to help my friends in whatever way I can, and the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to do the asshole thing that none of them is willing to do, but they all kind of want to.
yeah. And
which,
and
so it's such a good morally ambiguous thing to do, where you don't feel like Corbin's a hero now.
Yeah, no, no. We will have a lot to talk about in
Yeah,
that in when we get there.
all
But
right.
I agree with you. I mean, I think we'll talk about the reveal of him as a clone and what that is trying to do, and Sizik's choice to help him, and we'll get there. But I agree with you.
Yeah,
Corbin is a really fascinating character.
just the one last fun thing from this slide is the algae, which
Yeah,
as Miss Evildoon points out, they never bother to explain why they have algae.
it's just fuel.
It's fuel somehow.
Somehow. I mean, this is definitely very soft science fiction, right? Where
Yeah.
actually that's a great transition to our next slide. Where, oh wait, no, it's not. That's a great transition to 2 slides from now. Where
Can't wait to everybody just remember that, okay? Remember that
everyone just
transition.
let's put a pin in it, folks. Let's do that.
All right, okay. And here's a totally unrelated topic. We meet Sissix. The Andrisk standing before her was the first that she had ever spoken to directly. Her mind raced, scrambling to remember what she could of Andrisk culture. Complicated family structures, virtually no concept of personal space, physically affectionate, promiscuous. She mentally slapped herself for that one. It was a stereotype, one that every human knew whether they wanted to or not, and it smacked of ethnocentrism. They don't pair up like we do, she chided herself. It's not the same thing. Somewhere in her head, Professor Selim was frowning at her. The very fact that we use the term cold-blooded as a synonym for heartless should tell you something about the innate bias we primates hold against reptiles. She pictured him saying, "Do not judge other species by your own social norms." Determined to do her professor proud, Rosemary braced herself for some of that Andrisk cheek nuzzling she'd heard about, or perhaps another unexpected hug. However, this person wanted to greet her. She was going to flow with it. She was part of a multi-species crew now, and she was going to be graceful about it, damn it. But to Rosemary's disappointment, all the Andrisk woman did was extend one of her clawed hands, initiating a handshake. "You must be Rosemary," she said warmly. "I'm Sissix." Rosemary wrapped her fingers around Sissix's scaled palm as best she could. Their hands did not fit well together, but they made the best of it. Sissix was too alien for Rosemary to label her as beautiful, but striking. Yes, that was a better word. She stood a head taller than Rosemary, and her body was lithe and lean. Moss-green scales sheathed her body from the top of her head to the tip of her tail, fading into a paler shade over her belly. She had a smooth face, no nose or lips or ears to speak of, just holes for breathing and holes for hearing, and a small slit of a mouth. A multicolored shock of feathers covered her head like a short, festive mane. Her chest was as flat as a human's, but the contrast between her thin waist and her muscular saurian thighs gave the illusion of feminine hips, although Rosemary knew that the impression also stemmed from cultural bias. Male Andrisks were built exactly the same as females, only smaller. Her legs were slightly bowed, as if poised to spring, and her fingers and toes were capped with thick, blunt claws. Each claw was painted with lazy swirls of gold and looked to be filed down. She wore a pair of loose, low-slung trousers and a vest held together with one button. Rosemary recalled Professor Selim saying that Andrisks only wore clothes to make other species feel more comfortable. Between the clothes, the accent, and the handshake, Rosemary got the impression that Sissix had been around humans a long time.
And Chris says, "What a sexy voice you gave her, Matt. What a sexy, sexy voice."
That's right. I mean, I'm portraying her from the perspective of Rosemary, so of course I would use a sexy voice.
Oh gosh. I mean, listen, like, can you not sum up this book better than their hands did not fit well together, but they made the best of it, right?
Exactly.
That's the book. And
I love it.
it's perfect. It's a perfect way of introducing these two characters that obviously become romantically involved later in the book, which I thought was a really fascinating turn that the book took. Just because like we got this, like, Rosemary meets her thinking about her promiscuity, and then obviously this becomes a thing as they start to get romantically involved and what that means and how that's all going to work and the differences in the cultures, and they just make the best of it, you know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is great because obviously this is a science fiction book. There aren't real aliens that we know about, at least not yet. But this is a great way of comparing of people of different cultures and different beliefs that have to come in contact with each other. And like, I love the honesty with which she allows this character to immediately jump to the stereotypes, because I think if we're being honest with ourselves, sometimes we all do this, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't help yourself that you go to the stereotype first, and it's complicated, and interacting with people that are different than you can be complicated, and it takes work to try to not fall into your biases that everyone has. And so
Yeah.
we're using an extreme example of as a human and a lizard, a cold-blooded lizard alien, to make a point about human interaction, people interacting with each other. And I don't know, it's delightful. I love the thing that Chambers really wants to set down here to me is just it's not easy. It's really complicated, but the most important thing is that you try. And that's what
Yeah.
all these characters are doing. They're trying as hard as they can to get along with each other.
Yeah. All you can do is try and kind of give each other the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's funny. The one thing about this description that I actually did get wrong is that she has a small slit of a mouth, whereas I actually pictured her having like a saurian like
Oh yeah, I think I did
dinosaur
too.
mouth.
Yeah,
You know.
a velociraptor, as we said.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's funny. Um, yeah. No, I love this. This like you said, the idea that their hands don't fit, but they make it work. I love that. That's a perfect line.
Yeah, I knew I had to pull the slide when I was going back through it, and I saw that. And I was like, oh wait, that's the book. That's the whole book. Yeah, I did not pull a slide from them visiting Sissek's home world, but I do agree. It's really great. I mean, that's one of the things the book has the bandwidth to do is through all these little mini episodes, we get to see. It's not just that we get to know the Andrus culture through the character of Sissek's, but we get to see them in their natural habitat. We get to see how they interact with each other and see. I love the scene where she just comes upon the old woman in the middle of the shopping mall area, and just like that is so, it's such a fascinating moment of introspection on a completely different type of person. And I loved it. I loved our character's reaction to it. I thought it was just wonderful.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, that's one example where it's like I sort of prematurely pigeonholed this as like, okay, I see where we're going with the Andrisks.
Yeah.
And then later was like, oh no, I failed. I did not correctly see where we were going with the Andrisks. Like their culture was more nuanced and complex and interesting and
Yeah.
kind of enjoyable to learn about than I thought ahead of time. And that was kind of the case with like every new culture we met. It was always a bit more nuanced and unexpected than I thought it would be.
Yeah. I mean, there have been so many reptilian aliens in science fiction. You know, it's a very popular well to return to make just like, oh, what if the aliens are just like human-sized reptiles, and that could be interesting. And I mean, I think Chambers is commenting on it with this, like the idea of cold-blooded as heartless, like the assumption that these things would be cruel and indifferent. And no, they're more affectionate. They're like, and there's logic to that. I really like it. Like there's logic to a species that is cold-blooded to be very close and affectionate with each other. Like there's a lot of logic to that. And I loved it. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and also the further kind of complexity of like they don't really have the same feelings about their young as we do, and that makes it where you're like, oh, so they're just heartless reptiles. It's like, no, like they're not. They just don't care about the same things we care about. It's like an overlapping Venn diagram thing where it's like they think that our tendency to form monogamous pairs is weird.
Mm-hmm.
We think their tendency to abandon their young is weird. And it's like, well, both of those things are actually explained by the fact that we're not oviparous, and they are.
Yeah.
That's all there is to that. Like I thought it was a pretty good way of making it realistic and not kind of making them feel like I can't understand them. They're just creatures. It's
Yeah,
great.
I do think there's still really great elements of how their culture makes humans uncomfortable, though. Like, I
Hmm.
love the moment where I pulled the slide, so we'll talk about it in a bit, but where Ashby is like, should I make you keep your youth with you because I find that morally repugnant? Like, this is like,
Hmm.
it's not that there's no conflict between these peoples. It's just that they try to coexist in spite of this wall of understanding between them, where to a human being the idea of not caring about your young is horrifying.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of want to I want to attack this because this is a fun microcosm of the thing the book does over and over, which is
Sure.
distinct, I think, from what things like Star Trek usually do, which is that in your normal kind of space opera thing, it's like we present you with a sort of moral quandary in the form of like this species is doing this thing. Are you going to let that stand? And then it's like the characters have to like grapple with it and then like make some decision.
Right.
In this book, the decision is usually like not my place.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm, I'm just gonna do my best to keep to myself, and maybe I don't have to like love the fact that they abandoned their young, but I'm just gonna have to accept that about them
Yeah.
to coexist, and
Yeah.
um, that to me is way more, that's again more relatable and realistic than like constantly facing and having to make highly important moral choices. Like that's
Yeah.
not really what real life is like, certainly.
I mean, I,
Um,
I love Star Trek, but Star Trek is a very human centric story in which our characters constantly come upon other cultures that do things differently than humans, and the result is normally, no, stop it, that's
yeah,
bad. Our way is good. Do it our way. And then by
right.
the end of the episode, people are like, ah, yes, you're right. That way really was the better way. Thank you for fixing us. Good day. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's not realistic. And I think this is a much more modern interpretation of that same idea. Is that like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't sit right with me, and I'm never gonna like feel good about it. But like, I understand that it's different, and I need to be okay with that.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So some cool comments. Kristen says, "I love that Rosemary fell in love with her for her, not a human version of her. She fell in love with who she was and what she needed, and wanted to be part of that." Yeah, I thought that was really powerful as well. It's not like, oh, I'm really into this person, and I like it wasn't until she saw her in her natural habitat doing her natural things as a member of the species that it was like, oh, I'm into this now, and I want to give this person something that they're not getting on this ship, because I mean, this introduction here, right? Like, we meet Sizzix as this person that has been around humans for so long that she's adopted many I'm gonna make you feel comfortable around me customs.
Hmm.
And Rosemary wants us to be like, no, like, we should have to do some of that for you as well.
Yeah, exactly. Sizzix is such a fun character, actually.
I agree. It's one of my favorites on the I almost said the show because it feels so much like a TV show. One of my favorites in the book for sure.
Yeah, yeah. This was a good episode.
Let's move on to the next episode, which goes back to the thing we were talking about, which is where we learn how our tunneling technology works. Sort of. This is like the closest we get to actual science fiction in this hard science fiction in this sci-fi book. Aw, said Kizzy, clasping her hands over her heart. You're a physics virgin. Okay, we'll keep this simple. She looked around the counter for props. Okay, cool. Here. The area above my bowl of porridge, she gestured importantly, is the fabric of space. The porridge itself is the sublayer, basically the space in between space. And this grob, she picked up a small black fruit from her plate, is the wayfarer. Oh, I can't wait to see this, Dr. Chef said, resting his top arms on the opposite sides of the counter. Kizzy cleared her throat and straightened up. So here's us. She swooped the berry over the bowl. We've got two ends of space to connect, right? Here and here. She pressed her finger down into the porridge, making indentations on opposite ends of the bowl. So we travel to one end, whoosh, and all the people see us fly by are like, oh my stars, look at the totally amazing ship. What genius tech patched together such a thing? And I'm like, oh, it's me, Kizzy Shao. You all can name your babies after me, whoosh. And then we get on to our starting point. She hovered the berry above the disappearing dent in the porridge. Once we're in position, I turn on the interspatial bore. Do you see it when you flew in? Big old monstro machine strapped to our belly. It's a beast. Runs on ambi cells. Our entire ship couldn't hold that the amount of algae you'd need to power it. Oh, and fair warning, it's noisy as hell, so don't freak out while it's doing its thing. We're not blowing up or anything. So yes, Boar warms up, then we punch. She slammed the berry down into the porridge. And then it gets weird. Weird how? Rosemary said. Well, we're just squishy little three-dimensional creatures. Our brains can't process what goes on in the sublayer. Technically, the sublayer is outside of what we consider normal time. Understanding what's going on in there is like... It's like telling someone, a human I mean, to see an infrared. We just can't do it. So in the sublayer, you feel like something is wrong with the world, but you can't put your finger on what it is. It's very, very weird. Have you ever done Daffy? Rosemary blinked. Where she was from, people didn't casually ask about illegal hallucinogens over breakfast. No, I haven't. Well, it's kind of like that. Your visual perception and sense of time gets all fucked up, but the difference is you're fully in control of your actions. So that is wormholing 101, Matt. The closest the book comes to actually like explaining how things work.
Yeah, that's true, right? And it's funny because I was getting a flashback from like a short time ago when we were talking about the very similar description of space travel in Old Man's War. Except I do love the concept of like making artificial wormholes. There's actually like a Peter Watts several connected short stories that's about a ship that makes wormholes actually. So I was thinking about that as I was reading this, and could not be more different in every way. Say that.
It's such a cool idea, though. This idea of like you go to one side, you punch through, and you get to the other side, and then if you shore it up on your way through, boom, wormhole. It's a fun idea. I like it a lot. And I mean, this is doing double duty, right? It's explaining this, it's expositing how this thing works so we can understand it, while also doing a lot of heavy lifting of character work of Kizzy, who, as Tringard says, is just exactly like Kaylee from Firefly, and I like could not see her as anything other than the character Kaylee. Like in my mind's eye, that's just who she was. And I think I think Becky Chambers would probably say, yeah, I mean, that was definitely on my mind as I was writing the character.
Yeah, it's funny because I forgot about that character, and now that I'm like remembering her, I'm like, oh yeah, that is how I pictured Kizzy. So
I mean, it's like the exact same. It's like the very like happy, outgoing tech that just loves her ship and speaks to her ship. Like it's yeah. Jody says she definitely loves strawberries and hot cheese. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, I mean, like, I guess overall, how did you feel about the science fiction? I mean, I know you like the hard sci-fi stuff more. I just like, there was never a moment in reading this book where I was like, I really need you to explain this to me more. I just didn't need it at all.
No, it was suitably just like using the sort of Star Trek way of dealing with stuff, where it's just like we have artificial gravity somehow, doesn't matter how. We can bore wormholes using this stuff called ambi. What's ambi? What relationship does that have to anything that you know about? Nothing. Doesn't matter. Stop asking questions, and that's fine. You know, like you just have to accept that that's the kind of story that you're in. I mean, I love the fact that they're on a wormhole tunneling ship because they're sort of stitching together the cosmos, right? This is a story about communication and cooperation and interspecies communication, and they're this ship that's literally stitching the cosmos together by making wormholes between planets, which literally shortens the distance between them.
Exactly. Yep, you're totally right. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. And I agree with you. I didn't need anything more. I mean, it's like Star Trek for all people. Like, I love when people like Star Trek is science fiction and Star Wars is science fantasy. And I was like, yeah, okay. But also in Star Trek, like, they just do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Like, every time I think of sci-fi and Star Trek, I'm like, I can't mix matter and antimatter cold. I've got to have 30 minutes to heat it up. It's like, okay. You just make shit up. And that's the limitation. Like, that's what Star Trek does. Like, if it needs a problem, it just says, no, this is the problem that I've just made it up. And it's fine. It's fine. It doesn't need it.
We could reroute power through the deflector dish and emit some tachyons.
Can't do it. Also, you can mix matter and antimatter cold, by the way. It just creates you could just go back in time. That's what happens when you do that.
I'm pretty sure it just explodes either way, but
No,
whatever,
you go
Scotty.
back in time. They did it. Spock had a theory, never been tested, and then they went back in time, and then they used it again in Star Trek 4. That's how they go back in time, Matt. God, it's like you don't even know.
I mean, in real life.
Oh, mixing matter and antimatter in real life, Matt? Are you doing that a lot in real life? Just scooping up some antimatter, just mixing it together.
Someday, Scott. And then you'll be sorry. Then you'll all be sorry.
Jesus Christ.
Anyway, a lot of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sissix is like a Farscape character. That's interesting.
I've never
I
seen Farscape.
don't
Is
think I
that
ever watched
embarrassing?
Farscape, but my my cultural osmosis understanding of Farscape says, yeah, that makes sense.
I know what Farscape looks like. Like I can imagine the characters, but I've never actually watched an episode of it.
Yeah. There's a lot of TV around that time that had sci-fi that I just never watched, but I probably would have enjoyed actually.
Yeah, I think my brother-in-law loves Farscape.
We should watch Farscape. All right.
Yeah, with
Shall
all
we
our
move
with all
on?
our bonus time, let's just watch. How many
Yeah,
seasons of Farscape are there?
yeah. We'll just fit that in. All right. Next slide. We have Dr. Chef. I just want to admit right now that I never actually realized that his name was Dr. Chef. I thought like chef was like a name.
Didn't they
Anyway, Dr. Chef.
specifically say
and-
that like
Yeah,
he
I
took
think
the
I
name
just
because he's the chef?
I just didn't just blanked. Dr. Chef and Sissix ponder the essential nature of humanity. Dr. Chef cradled his mug in his hand feet. He nodded toward the pixel board. A very typical human game. How so? All human games are based around conquest. Not true, she said. They've got lots of cooperative games. What about Battle Wizards? Scarcely a 10-day went by in which Kizzy and Jinx um, didn't plug into that game with slappers. Even those two weren't dumb enough to jack, exploring magical worlds and sharing merry adventures inside their heads. Dr. Chef waved a free handfoot dismissively. I don't mean brain games. I mean stuff like this, he said, gesturing to the pixel board. The classics. Things humans have been playing since before they even knew there were other planets out there. All conquest, all competition. Come to think of it, even Battle Wizards is like that. The players work together, but they're still working to defeat a common enemy, the game itself. Sissix mulled this over. The idea of humans as conquerors had always been a laughable one, not just because they had meager resources or because the diaspora could never get anything done, but because the humans she knew personally were so unassuming. Ashby was one of the kindest individuals she'd ever met, of any species. Jinx didn't have any ambitions beyond living comfortably alongside people he liked. Kizzy had managed to drop a sandwich into an air duct last 10-day, so they hardly needed to worry about her launching a coup. Corbin was a hateful pain in the ass, but harmless, and a coward too. And yet, human history, pre-Exodus at least, was rife with cruelty and endless war. Sissix had never been able to make sense of that.
I think there's a lot to talk about here, actually. Obviously, this is Becky Chambers doing something fun where we can comment on humanity by exploring it from the perspective of a species that is not our own, and so we get to like look at ourselves from the outside, and it is really interesting because I don't think characters like Jenks and Kizzy and Ashby and even Corbin to a certain extent are like a different kind of humanity than people that are alive in real life today, right? They just seem like the reason why these characters are so relatable is because they just feel like people. And it is really interesting, like this commentary on like what were these people that are just like trying to get through world, but also human history is filled with cruelty and war and death and terribleness. And it is interesting just to comment on this seeming contradiction between the individual's just simple desire to exist and also try to be empathetic and kind to people, and humanity as a whole's struggle with its cruel nature. I don't know. I find something really fascinating in this.
Yeah, right. As individuals, we all just want to get along and do what's right. But it's very easy to make groups of us scared of other groups.
Yeah, yeah.
And people, they act under incentives. They'll do crazy, terrible things if they feel like they're in danger.
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me that, Sissix is mostly interacting with humans who are already basically, interculturalists. like you're just, I've lived in international contexts. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference with, basically mostly non-Americans, and you're not going to run into a lot of pain in the ass bigots in a context like that. Like, just everybody you're going to run into is going to be
Sure.
a considerate, culturally sensitive person who's doing their best. And that's the context that Star Trek is. That's the context that
Mm-hmm.
this is. And so it's like, yeah, well, Sissix, you've kind of only met the best of us, so
Yeah, that's true.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I really like just that idea that introduces, like, what makes, and we have another slide where Dr. Chef compares humanity and his species, which is also commenting on the cruelty of people
mhm.
in really beautiful ways. I can't wait to talk about that, but we'll
Yeah,
get to that. The other thing I wanted to briefly touch on here that I thought this would be a good slide to do so is, like, the idea of as someone in the comments said, the Matrix existing in this world. Like, there is a artificial space that you can jack into, but a lot of people just don't do it, and nobody on the ship does it. I just, that's so wild to introduce this thing and then have people go, "Nah, I don't know about that. That's not really for me."
I actually really like that as like a kind of good hard sci-fi touch, because like it's entirely likely that it's something like that will exist at some point, and then it's like, yeah, but not everybody's going to go into it, and the people who are going to choose to go out into space are going to be the people who didn't choose to go into the Matrix, right? So
Sure, sure.
they're all going to be like rolling their eyes at these people who are wasting their lives in Fantasyland. That seems very realistic to me.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It was a fun touch. I love the idea that, like, there's multiple ways to jack in. Like, they have the slappers, which is just like a much simpler, not as intense connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Mike is saying, like, the Matrix equivalent seems like it's just not as safe in the world that's been crafted. Um,
See, I wasn't sure if it was unsafe because it was like considered to be extremely addictive and seductive, or if
Interesting.
it was unsafe because it was going to burn out your brain.
Yeah,
If
interesting.
somebody can remind me if that was specified, let me know.
So there's a lot of conversation going on in the chat right now about hard sci-fi, and which this is definitely not. Some people talking about the hard sci-fi books like Red, Green, Blue Mars. Of course, your beloved Blind Sight gets
Mm.
mentioned here, Matt, which is the only reason I'm bringing this up, because we can't talk about a sci-fi novel without you talking about Blind Sight at least 4 times throughout the course of the show.
Correct. I think we're on number 2 now, at
Yeah.
least.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, I think the thing that sparked this whole conversation was Miss Evil Doom was talking about the focus of this book itself. I'm going to keep saying show. I'm going to keep almost saying show. The focus of this show is the people, is the characters, and so the science and technology of it all is really just a backdrop for that. And I think that the thing people are saying is that hard sci-fi can still focus on character. Blind Sight being an example of it. I know you love the characters in
Yeah.
that
Right.
novel.
I mean, just I think it's literally just like, if we're gonna call it hard sci-fi, then it has to try to stick to what is believed to be correct science as much as possible.
Yeah,
And
with
I mean,
vampires.
yeah, like genetically engineered paleo vampires, which is totally real science.
Yeah, I got one just in the other room right now.
I believe you.
All right, let's talk about Ohan, who is the one character we haven't talked about yet. Their navigator, who I think not my favorite character in the book, but I think one of the most interesting ideas that the book creates, the Cianat pair. So let's read about Ohan a little bit. Bandage in place and blood cleaned away, Ohan returned to the window. They picked up the razor, clicking their cheek as they dragged the blade through their fur. As they did so, they thought of the concept of purpose. Dr. Chef's purpose was to heal and nourish. Ashby's purpose was to bind his crew together. Accepting the Wayne ran contrary to those purposes. For them, accepting the death of a crew member was difficult. Ohan hoped they knew how much that effort was appreciated. Ohan's own purpose was to be a navigator, to unveil the universe for those who were blind to it. After death, Ohan would no longer be able to pursue that purpose, and they could not deny that this saddened them. At least there would be time for one more job, this new tunnel at Hedrick Ka. The Wayne had only begun its first stage. There was time for a tunnel before succumbing. Ohan hoped that Ashby was not uncomfortable with letting them embrace the Wayne's final stage aboard the Wayfarer. They could think of nothing more fitting than dying in the place that housed their purpose. Ohan looked again into the black hole. They closed their eyes and pictured great swaths of fragmented matter, falling and pressing endlessly. Larab, they would call it in their native tongue, a word to describe form. And Gruss, too, a word for color of unseen matter. There were no words in Clip for the colors or shapes that lay beyond sight. They had tried at times to explain these things to the Wayfarer's crew, but there were no words, no abstractions that could open their crewmates' handicapped minds. Ohan preferred to take in the sight alone, especially now. A black hole was the perfect place to contemplate death. There was nothing in the universe that could last forever. No star, not stars, not matter, nothing. The razor cut, their wrist ached, the sky roiled, unseen. So this is Ohan. What a fascinating idea, right? So a species that has been taken over by a virus that you could maybe call it a symbiotic relationship, although I think jury's kind of still out on how much this is symbiosis and how much this is just a virus taking control of upper brain functions.
This is yet another thing that I appreciated was that the book didn't try to spoon feed us like some moral about like, oh, it's actually totally good and fine that the virus is considered to be like part of Wuhan, or like obviously the virus is bad and
Yeah.
like no, I don't know, you don't know, the author's just creating an interesting situation where you're like, none of my moral intuitions have anything useful to say about this, so I guess all you can do is honor the stated preferences of the person standing in front of you, um, unless you're Corbin. Um,
Sure.
and it's just it's great. Yeah, I really like this. I like this concept. You know, it's funny. This didn't occur to me until now, until I'm kind of analyzing it. But Ohan slightly reminds me of like the Guild Navigators in Dune, where the idea is that you have an individual who, you know, has basically superhuman brain powers
Mm-hmm.
caused by something exogenous to them, but that it is like warping what they are and who they are.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I saw there was a lot of discussions in this about this in our Discord over the last couple weeks about like the morality of, and we'll get into the actual decision. I did, of course, pull a slide specific to the actual decision on whether or not to cure him, and I want to talk about that later. But I mean, I just love the concept of just the concept of this species is something I don't think I've seen before in like we talked about earlier. We you've seen the reptilian like alien. I kind of think you even seen the Dr. Chef type, who is basically just Dexter Jetster from Star Wars. um, but this idea of the species was something that I don't think I had seen before, and I really enjoyed it.
mhm. Yeah, me too.
Ugh, I'm sorry, folks. My eye has been bothering me for like a day, and it's acting up now. So I'm not
It's
obsessively winking at you right now. It's just ugh.
it's kind of funny because my eye has been messed up for like literally a year at this point. So we're just two guys sitting here on camera like futzing with our
Yeah.
eyes endlessly. It's quite a thing.
It's a great. I woke up this morning and my eye was hurting. I was like, oh no, this is a great time to be on camera. So sorry about that. Anyway, um, lots of conversation going on in the chat right now about the neopronouns that are used, which is the I don't actually. They're talking about how to pronounce them
Yeah.
because I
I
don't
think it's
actually.
I think it's Zier is how they said it
Yeah, yeah,
in the book, and that's how I've heard it. I think I first heard it in a book quite a while ago. Forgetting which one though.
yeah. I,
It's not new. Like they've been it's been in sci-fi for at least a decade by
sure.
my reckoning.
It is interesting that because of the world that Becky Chambers has created, they them cannot be used as like a neutral pronoun because it's used specifically for these CNET pairs. Like it is literally used for the plural, and so therefore the neopronouns kind of have to be used for gender neutral because
Hmm.
there's already a use for they them in this world. Um,
Yeah,
interesting stuff.
yeah, you're right, and sort of hedging toward like the direction of just like more complicated to better uh, uh, map the reality of how complicated things actually are in this
Yeah.
galaxy full of species.
Super complicated. Yep.
Do you get the feeling? I mean, maybe I forgot something, but like, do you get the feeling that there's like a bunch of minor species running around that aren't, Andrisks or humans or anything we would recognize, and that it's just sort of not mentioned? Or do you feel like there's only kind of the specific the specific species that we have been introduced to?
No, I feel like there's a bunch of species. Yeah, I mean, I think we get the bird pirates. I forget what
Hmm.
their name are, but like, I feel like there are a bunch of smaller, more minor species like that running around. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
this is like thousands and thousands of species, and yeah, we have
yeah,
the main ones that are part of the GC. But yeah, that's
yeah.
that's the get. That's what I.
That was the feeling I got. I just wasn't sure. Like, I don't remember it ever saying outright like how many sapients there were. Um, so I wasn't sure, but
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that like the interesting thing about the story is that humans come late to the history of the galaxy, kind of, right? That
Hmm.
like I forget what the name of the tentacle mouth people had basically conquered most of the galaxy before they became a little bit more benevolent.
Hmm. Yeah, I forget their name too. The names didn't stick
It
with me
starts with
super
an
well.
H because it's a nonsense word that I don't really
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, yeah. For some reason, Andrisk sticks with me though. I think it's because it sounds like, you know the prefix ander, which means man, which is kind of funny because it's like a lizard man. It's like man lizard
Hmm.
Andrisk. It's kind of
Yeah.
sounds like it, but
Hey, speaking of the pirates, the Akarax. Um,
are the Akarax here?
yes, the Akarax are here.
All right, so here we have the Akarax show up, and there's pirates, and Rosemary has an opportunity to show her quality. I know you wanted to be the one to read that, Scott. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
A large part of her argued in favor of self-preservation. Shut up, just give them everything. You're going to get shot. But the braver thought won out. How many are aboard your ship? Are there any children? Blue Suit snarled and raised the gun again. What difference does it make how many we are? You will do as we say. Rosemary wiggled her fingers in a calming gesture. I will, but if there is any way that you can spare us enough food to last until the next market, we will be humbly grateful. We do not wish to die out here any more than you do. Furthermore, I have read that Akarak young have very specific nutritional needs. If you have children aboard, we must make sure that our food does not lack for nourishment. Captain Big considered this. We do have children aboard, Z said. Rosemary took this as a good sign. Ashby's injured face and the pulse rifles aside, these people didn't seem violent, just desperate. And yes, their needs are great. We may not find what we need aboard your ship. Then let me offer this, Rosemary said, treading carefully. One of us will show you to our food stores. As I understand it, the Kesh Tahem market is less than a 10-day from here. We will not be traveling there, as we cannot stray from our flight path. Take from us only what you need to last you the trip to Kesh Tahem, and we will give you credits in trade-worthy supplies so that you may purchase more suitable food. This way your young will get what they need, and we will not starve on our journey. The Akarax talked among themselves. Rosemary dug her nails in harder, hoping the pain would quiet the tremors beneath her skin. Her entire offer banked on a tiny piece of possibly erroneous info that she tucked away during one lone semester of Intro to Hermogean Colonial History.
Hey, that's the word.
Yeah. If she was wrong, well, she'd find out soon enough. At least they were all still breathing. Ashby was breathing, right? Rosemary, Sissek said, how are we doing? We're okay, said Rosemary. I hope. Hang on. We find this acceptable, Captain Big said. What sort of fuel do you use? Algae. We will take some of that as well. Um, this is this is such a fun idea that she's able to. So like this is something I was thinking about as I was reading this book. As I was like, I don't feel like there's going to be any big gunfights in this book.
Hmm.
And as this, I was actually kind of surprised when they were boarded by pirates. I was like, oh, they're being boarded by pirates. How are they going to get out of this one? And then it's like, oh, it was solved through cultural understanding and diplomacy. I should
Uh
have
huh.
absolutely seen that coming.
Yeah, we should have, but of course I didn't.
Yeah.
I pulled this because this interaction is such a perfect way of understanding what this book is doing that makes it so different from so many other different stories of this kind. Even, I mean, Chambers kind of starts with what you think is going to be the way it always goes, where they knock out the captain, where the captain is down for the count. He's been physically attacked, and then you just think it's going to get worse from there, and it doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah. He just talks him down. Just talks him
Yeah,
down.
just talks
Figures
him down.
out that it's like what's the chink in the armor going to be, right? And it's like, oh, the chink in the armor is just that they like to be fair. Actually,
Yeah,
very fair pirates.
extremely fair pirates, just like the ones in the Caribbean. You know.
Yeah, right. It's they follow the code exactly.
I just really like this. People are talking about how Akarak is a perfect onomatopoeia for bird people. Yeah. I think it's World of Warcraft that had the Arakoa, which was their bird people. It's just like the A's and the K's and the R's just make some good bird people sounding names.
Aviax also.
Oh yeah, the Aviax, EverQuest. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, so much of my understanding of language comes from video games. Isn't that wild?
That's great. Yes, it's funny. Sophie says, violence aside, they didn't seem violent.
Well, I mean, the funniest thing about this is we kind of learned that the only reason they did strike the captain is because he accidentally made a hand gesture that's interpreted as extremely rude and dismissive without knowing it. Which is like, I mean, I think a lot of what the book is saying is so much of conflict and violence and disagreement is brought down to just misunderstanding and miscommunication. And if you really try to get through that, you can come to a solution that everyone is more or less happy with.
Yeah. Another thing that I thought was great is that, like, this is almost the most violence we see in the book. I mean, they get shot at later, but this is like the most interpersonal violence we see, and everyone takes a long time to recover from this, and that's totally realistic.
Oh yeah,
like stories are just and I love action stories. I love action movies, but like the fact is that normal people do not do well when guns are put in their face, and it's totally realistic that all these characters would have like their own private little struggle with dealing with the emotions they felt during this event. And I actually liked that. I appreciated that it kept things kind of grounded in this way.
Yeah, Kizzy has a form of PTSD after this for sure, where she's not sleeping, she's diving herself into her work and not really handling this well at all.
Right.
Because I mean, it's a scary thing that happened. They like, especially in a world where so many of these people are anti-violence, that violence just doesn't seem to happen very often.
Yeah, right. It really triggers this interesting, interaction with Ashby, who's like this basically pacifist Exodin.
Yeah.
Who's like, I'm really I'm not going to have guns on my ship, and there has to be this compromise where they're like, well, we need some way of defending ourselves, and kind of leads to a whole plot movement where they go to get some energy shields, basically, which I guess ends up saving them, right? I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, I don't know. Was the shield on when they got hit? I guess it was.
It's an important question, everyone.
I don't remember. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, it was good. I was surprised it happened. I was surprised with how it resolved, and I was pleasantly surprised with how the fallout was realistic. So overall, I was just like, I think this is one of the scenes where the book went from like, yeah, I guess I'm enjoying this, to being like, yeah, this is actually like a really well put together, well thought out story.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was really happy, like, because I mean, like, there's hundreds of ways this whole thing could have gone, and 9 times out of 10, it's not going to go the way it was in this. In this story, so really, really fun to see. All right, let's move on to our conversation between Dr. Chef and Rosemary. This is right after she has revealed the truth of her nature to the crew. And he's kind of trying to help her by showing how terrible his species is. Our species are very different from one another. You have 2 hands. I have 6. You sleep in a bed. I sleep in a tub. You like mech. I don't. Many little differences. But there's one big thing that Grum and humans have in common, and that is our capacity for cruelty. Which is not to say we are bad at the core. I think both of our species have good intentions, but when left to our passions, we have it within ourselves to do despicable things. The only reason humans stopped killing each other to the extent that you used to, I think, is because your planet died before you could finish the job. My species was not so lucky. The reason you haven't seen any other Grum is because there are only some 300 of us left. Rosemary's hand went to her mouth. I'm sorry, she said. Such a quintessentially human thing, to express sorrow through apology. I'm not, Dr. Chef said. It was our own doing. Our extinction wasn't caused by a natural disaster or the slow crawl of evolution. We killed ourselves. He thought aloud for a moment, sorting out all the pieces. For generations, my species was at war with itself. I couldn't even tell you why. Oh, there are historians with all sorts of theories and ideas, but it's the same story you hear everywhere. Different beliefs, different cultures, territories everyone wanted. I was born into that war, and when I was ready, I took my place in it as a doctor. I wasn't the sort of doctor I am now. I didn't become friends with my patients. I didn't have long chats with them about their diets or what sort of immubots they should upgrade to. My job was to patch up dying soldiers as fast as I could, so that they could get back out there and keep killing. Near the end, the outsiders, that's roughly what we called the others, started using these projectiles called, he hummed and thought, trying to find an analog and clip, organ cutters. You see, the outsiders had been separated from us, from my faction, for so long that they had become genetically distinct. The organ cutters were programmed to hone in on our genetic markers. If they hit an outsider by mistake, it hurt them, but it was nothing worse than an ordinary bullet wound. But if an organ cutter hit one of us, that triggered its real purpose. Which was, Rosemary said, looking fearful. He looked out the window, but he did not see the stars. To burrow. A cutter would dig through a person's inside until it hit something vital. It wouldn't stop until the victim was dead. And then it goes on from there to say that he learns that actually it was his people that invented these things and the other side just stole them and used them first. And it's horribly depressing and very sad and wonderful. I love Dr. Chef.
Yeah. I think, relating to what we were saying earlier about the idea that, like, I can't imagine humans as being violent because all the ones I've met are so nice. It's like Dr. Chef is just the absolute teddy bear, moral center of the crew type guy. And it was his species that were apparently so violent they wiped themselves out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because this is something incredibly relatable. Like, this is the exact problem that our species is having now, right? This is we're fighting amongst each other, we're killing each other, we're not in full all-out war currently, but there's incredible cruelty is done by human beings to human beings every single day, and sometimes in widespread occasions. And I mean, the book says, we stopped because we lost our planet and we were basically forced to either coexist or die. And I mean, there's something reassuring about that. It's like, oh, there's maybe a way to get us to stop killing each other, but also the idea that the only way to do that is by losing our planet, that like our planet has to die, and then maybe we'll finally be like, oh, we've got to fix this. That's kind of depressing.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's the sort of thing where science fiction is very good at saying, okay, so like I love optimistic science fiction, but optimistic science fiction has this problem where it totally hand waves away the part where it's like, okay, but how did you get to the part where we're all singing Kumbaya? Mm-hmm. Star Trek is like, yes, we've just evolved morally, yeah. And it's like, what does that mean? Like, were there some new moral philosophers who came about who wrote some moral philosophy that everybody read and was like, holy shit, this is true. This is just so obvious and self-evident that we're all just going to follow this new code of morality.
Nope.
I mean, because Star Trek doesn't say that that's the case. And
no, because the most hilarious thing about Star Trek is all the references that they reference in past is
Shakespeare
it's our past.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this huge, gray area, this hand wave thing where it's like how we suddenly decide to become peaceful. And it's like, yeah, I mean, the reason that we're not peaceful is that people operate under incentives, which is the thing that I say a lot, but it's like, it's just sort of, I feel, needs to be belabored. So it's like, yeah, the only thing that's going to bring us to peace is if there's like a really powerful incentive against war. Mm-hmm. I mean, like having, nuclear weapons has actually made it so that we don't have any more of these global catastrophic wars anymore, right? So like that's one example of something that has actually made humanity a bit more peaceful. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's an undiluted good, because now we have the ability to literally blow up the whole planet. So it's
No.
like, I don't know. I don't want to suggest that a super weapon is the answer, but
I think it was Dan Carlin who was like, it was when he did his whole series on nuclear weapons, and he was like, we're living in an experiment, a perpetual experiment about whether humanity can survive the existence of world destroying weapons. And
hmm
like, so far so good.
hmm
80 years and counting. We're
hmm
doing it. Like, I mean, that's like, it is kind of fascinating that no one's set off one of these weapons yet, right? That like we've had these things for this long, and they've never been used. Like
yeah.
it
Well,
is
other than
like,
the first two, yeah,
well, yes, but that was only because we did that before anyone else had them, and so
yeah,
we didn't have to worry about the consequences of those actions. So, but I mean,
yes,
but the second another side in the conflict got them, it's just like they came off the table. I mean, it's remarkable. Like you talk about uh, the incentives
hmm
for behavior. Like that's one of the biggest tests of it, right? We haven't fired them yet. That's
yeah,
fascinating. And I mean,
yeah,
that's the problem with that, saying that is that's gonna be true every day until the day it's not true anymore, and then we will cease to exist. So I mean, like, I don't know. It is really interesting. Like it does make you kind of believe that it's possible that there could be an incentive structure big enough to where we actually do embrace pacifism. I
yeah.
think that's
I,
true.
I think, yeah. I guess the thread I was trying to find, which I kind of lost as I started talking about nuclear weapons, is basically like I don't want the answer to be mutually assured destruction is what keeps us peaceful. I want the answer to
No,
be
no.
that we evolve spiritually in some
Yeah.
way that I can't imagine, and we just become better people. Um, I don't know what that would look like though.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just have to stick with mutually assured destruction for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of gone off topic, but people are saying it's not just nuclear weapons that have caused this kind of broader international cooperation. It's other incentive structures. I think that's totally true. But I also can't help but think that if there were no nuclear weapons, the United States and the Soviet Union definitely would have gone full scale war against each other, and
Yeah,
God knows what that would have looked like.
exactly. Yes, right. For sure. And there'd be a lot of other wars. There'd be a lot of
Yeah,
other
yeah,
states that would be. Yeah. Anyway, that is definitely a tangent. I mean, it's all. I think stuff like this is always on the table when you're talking about science fiction, because science
sure,
fiction is
sure.
really about our world, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I think that's just kind of my take on. I I guess I just wish that science fiction novels that posit like everyone just decided to be peaceful would actually go into that a little bit more. And this is one example where I wish they had gone into it a little bit more.
I think it's hard. I like because actually, I feel like if there was an easy exploration of the answer to that, then maybe we would try to do it more. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
it's much easier to just say, to just be aspirational and say we know we just eventually figured it out. We just figured
Yeah,
it out, and that's like that makes me feel good and warm about humanity. But the actual, step by step process of how you get from where we are now to being a species that is almost entirely pacifist. Although, as we see in the book, not entirely, because we have Rosemary's father selling weapons to two sides in the conflict. That sounds like classic human behavior to me.
yeah,
So it's obviously not perfect. People are always going to be people, but I think broadly humanity, as depicted in this book, is much better than we are now.
yeah, yeah. Well, if I ever figure out the solution to humanity's spiritual evolution, I will write a science fiction novel about it.
Write a novel. I'm just gonna write a novel.
How,
Yeah.
how else would you disseminate that knowledge, Scott?
All right. You want to move on to the next slide?
Let us do that. So here we have the revelation that Corbin is a clone. His father spoke. They hurt you. Corbin leaned back in his chair, making sure that his father could get a good look at the fading bruises on his face. This was exactly why he hadn't let Dr. Chef fix anything but the bones. He had been hoping for this moment, the moment in which his father would see what his hubris had done. Hello, Marcus. And yes, I came back from prison with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs. One came damn close to puncturing my lung. I'm sorry, Artis. I'm so sorry. Sorry, said Corbin. I get ripped out of my home, beaten to a pulp, and thrown into some Quellan hellhole, only to be told that my entire life is a lie. And you're sorry. Well, thanks, but that doesn't quite cut it. Marcus sighed. This is why I called, you know. I figured you had some questions. If you can stop hating me for a few minutes, I'd be happy to answer them. I can't make many calls from here. Ansible access is a rare thing. Corbin stared at the man in the pixels. He looked so defeated, so tired. Corbin found himself shaken by it, and it made him all the angrier. All I want to know, Corbin said, is where I really came from. Marcus nodded and looked down at his lap. You know all those times you asked about your mother? Of course. All you ever said was she died in a shuttle crash. You never wanted to talk about her, which makes sense, since she never existed. Oh no, Marcus said. I did have a wife. She wasn't your mother, of course, but... His eyes went somewhere far away. Artists, I've never been good with people. I've always preferred my lab. I like data. Data is consistent, it's steady, it's easy to understand. With data, you always know what the answer is. If the data doesn't make sense, you can always puzzle it out. And like people. He shook his head. I can never puzzle people out. I'm sure you understand. Corbin clenched his jaw. Damn it, he thought. How much of me is actually you?
All right, so let's talk about Corbin the Clone and the arc he does go through in this story. I think this is a really fascinating thing because, you know, I think a lot of Corbin it obviously comes from his father. Not only his father seemingly was a terrible father, but also had a lot of flaws. Like this is a science fiction depiction of you passing your sins on to your child, although it's made literal because it's just a carbon copy of yourself in that regard. Like I love the concept, and I love how it's dramatized here. How much of me is actually you, right? He's obviously a man who's hated his father for a very long time, and then learns that he literally is his father. I love that.
Yeah, that is. You're exactly right. That's a great taking a common idea and making it a science fiction idea.
Mm-hmm.
He literally is all of the things that he hates and has to come to terms with that. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting where Corbin goes by the end of the story is it's not like he becomes a different person. It's more like he just comes to view his own nature a bit differently, I suppose.
Well, and I think most importantly, the rest of the crew does as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think they suddenly like love him and like they're
Yeah.
gonna be best friends with him. He's still a person that struggles with people just like his father does. But they have an understanding of him and he has an understanding of them. And I mean, obviously the solution to this whole problem of him being a clone is the perfect, elegant solution, which is you have to hang out with the species that you hate for at least a year. A standard, sorry.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful. And again, like we talked about earlier in the show, this idea that it's this choice is actually like that the Chambers frames the decision here from the perspective of Sisek, not Corbin. Like this isn't actually about the racist becoming not racist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the victim of the racism doing the right thing in spite of the racism. Like
Right.
and that's such an interesting way of framing the situation. Like
Yeah.
like he's an asshole. He is entirely undeserving of the kindness and the help you were going to extend to him, but you're going to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Right. And I think we get an indication by the end that the fact that the crew is willing to go to these lengths for him, he realizes like, okay, this is basically grace. Like they've basically taken care of me even though I don't deserve it. and I guess I'm gonna have to sort of work harder to pay this back to them.
Yeah. And that's what leads to his decision with what's his name? Which is as you said, the perfect Corbin way of trying to solve a problem that he doesn't fully understand. And I don't know if I pulled the slide in which he goes through his reasoning for that, but it's like, I think they don't ever say it in the book, but I wonder if like, his lack of understanding of people expands to a level of neuroatypical, right? Like he
Hmm.
seems to legitimately, like in the speech he gives when he is about to give the drug, is like, these people are sad and I don't understand why, but I want to do whatever I can to make it so they're not anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that was my read, honestly, was that he was neurotypical and had trouble relating to people in a fundamental way.
Hmm.
That maybe it wasn't just like he could decide to do better, but that didn't mean that he wasn't going to try to do better.
Yeah, yeah. And as Trinkart says, until this incident, he seemed to have given up on understanding and sympathizing with people. After this incident, he is at least trying again, which I think that's great. That's spot on. And as we said, one of the messages of this book is try, try. It's hard. It's
Yeah,
complex. We don't fully understand each other, but we're all we have, and we've got to make it work.
yeah, right.
All right. Speaking of the cure, let's kind of deal with this moral quagmire, Matt. Sizek stood before him, hands on her hips. Kizzy tells me there's a cure for what's killing Ohan, one that would leave him able to navigate, and that would extend his life by a good century or so. She tells me you just came back from a planet full of happy, healthy people who can attest to that. And apparently there's a cure in our medbay right now, and you're just going to let it gather dust while Ohan lies shaking himself to death in a pool of his own sick. Ashby swung his eyes up to her. You keep saying his. Yes, because it finally occurred to me that Ohan is an individual, a sick man who needs our help. Sizzix, this is not my call. What do you want me to do? Tie them down and force it on them? If that's what it takes. You're being ridiculous. I'm their employer, not their arbiter. You're his friend, and you're letting him die. I gave them the option, Sizzix. They know it's there. What the hell else am I supposed to do? He threw a boot aside. Sizzix, this is not a matter of someone refusing medical treatment. This is their entire culture we're talking about. This is their religion. This is so fucking human of you. Lie back and let the galaxy do whatever it wants because you're too guilty about how badly you fucked up your own species to ever take initiative. Ashby got to his feet. What is it you people say? Ixeth ixkith? Let each follow their own path? Sizzix's eyes flashed. That's different. How so? That means don't interfere with others if there's no harm being done. There is harm being done here, Ashby. Ohan is dying. If I told you to go back to Hashkath and bring your kids here to live with you, would you? What are you even talking about? If I told you treating your children like strangers offends every bone in my milk-fed mammalian body, and that as a human captain I expect you to follow my moral code, that's different, Ashby. You know that's... Okay, so let's deal with this, Matt. First of all,
Yeah,
I think what you said earlier is right, that while each of us is going to read this thing and come to our own moral conclusion, I don't think the book is moralizing about this decision. I don't think the book is trying to say, here is what the right decision is or was or could be. I think the book's just like, this is fucking complicated and we all have our own perspective on it.
yeah,
That's just the way it is.
yeah. I mean, Sissix has trouble even seeing how how Ashby could credibly say like you should bring your kids here to live with you. That
Yeah.
offends me. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, well, we'll get over it. It's like, well, no, it's hard. It's really hard for me to get over it
Yeah.
as a human
Mm-hmm.
because it really seems like you're being a neglectful monster to me. Like
Yeah.
that's just the way that's as close to being the way we're wired as it means. Uh, like it's fundamental, right?
Yeah.
So so you know, especially this idea that like the virus has changed him to be someone who really wants the virus to stick around.
Right.
It's like and he's been this way for most of his life basically. It's like I
Yeah.
don't know, like I don't know the answer to this one. This is not one of those moral quandaries that has a cleanly cut answer. It's kind of like I said earlier, like all you can really do when you're thinking about moral questions is navigate by your own intuitions.
Yeah.
And the fun thing about sci-fi is that it's able to construct situations where your intuitions are just either unhelpful or like actively in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
And different people come down on different sides of these things often because some intuitions are stronger in some people than others, and that's fine. The result is that there is no obvious right answer.
Right.
And I like that. I like that about this.
Yeah, because I mean that's the reality of cultural meshing, right? That like
Yeah.
there are things that different cultures do and different cultures see that are uncomfortable at best and disturbing at worst to each other, and navigating those conflicts is always going to be hard. It's always going to be hard. There is never going to be a clear cut and dry answer of yes, this is obviously the right thing to do. Like I could sit here and say that yeah, I think this virus is self protecting and therefore is going to instill a sense of please keep me around in this thing. Yeah, that's I could like just decide that in my brain and say yes, you should obviously kill this thing. But that's not entirely true, because as Ashby points out here, this is their culture. They've built their culture around this thing. Their entire culture has been built around this thing. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, at some point we say someone is impaired enough to not be able to make their own medical decisions. But it's not the same. It's not the same. And
Yeah.
you could try to make it the same to make your decision easier, but it's not reality. And I mean, these are going to be problems that all cultures are going to deal with throughout time, no matter whether they're human cultures or alien species cultures or what have you. They're just things we're always going to have to deal with. And the as you said earlier, all we can do is kind of try to be as understanding as possible and
Yeah.
and try to work through it as a community, as a large organization.
Yeah. I mean, to riff on what you were saying as you were kind of thinking it through, like the other side is that Ohan, the being that we have known as Ohan, does sort of practically cease to exist when they cure the virus.
Yeah, it's a different person. Yeah,
it's a different person now. So it's like, yeah, like you did actually like, kill someone and replace them with someone different, and
but that person was about to die anyway, right? Like that person was going, like whether or not you inject the virus, the cure or not, that person was going to cease to exist. So you've also allowed that person to cease to exist and created a new life out of that person. You kind of just reset the AI a little bit there, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, reset the AI. Yeah. That's I mean, I think that is definitely done to be paralleled. It's funny how there's a kind of status quo bias thing that happens where like I think the crew leans toward just doing the thing that was going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And Ashby's the only one who's enough of just like doesn't really care what people are going to say, that he does the thing that everybody wants to do.
Corbin.
Corbin. Yeah, what I meant to say.
I think
anyway, it's a fascinating thing at the core of this.
The wrinkle that Chambers throws into this that I absolutely love, that like you can tell she was trying to construct a situation in which there was no easy answer, is that with the cure he gets to retain his magical navigator powers anyway. Like imagine the moral dilemma if doing this would also eliminate his purpose, right? Because then you have a crew who's wrestling with the idea of losing their navigator, losing their ability to navigate at the same time. But no, like it's constructed in this way where it's like, oh wait, so you get to live another 100 years and be healthy and also still get to do the thing that you were doing this whole time? That sounds like a great solution. Like it's so brilliantly constructed. I love it so much.
Yeah, there's no drawbacks from my point of view, and then and then Ohan is like shaking with rage and fear, and that you're even suggesting this. You're like, oh Jesus. It's great.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So good.
All right, next slide. So after hundreds of pages, we finally get to meet the new species joining the GC that made this very long way to this very angry planet necessary. Tell me, said the new mother. Tuum obeyed. The tunnelers do not speak in agreement with their leaders. They have doubts about our alliance. The new mother smacked her mouth in acknowledgement. This falls into their pattern. Forgive me, new mother, but does this not concern you? The commons pattern concerned us at first, she said. So many species, so many different ideas, all joined within a single clan. We did not see how such a thing could stand. Tuum and Full clicked their knee joints in agreement. When the Galactic Commons speakers had first approached the Turumika, 3 of the new mothers were not in favor of their offer. They had left Turumika space once it was clear that there could be no agreement. They had their own clans now, and were enemies of the Turumika. One had been killed. This was the way. But they spoke as one, Full said. In the first talks and the negotiations after, the Commons people spoke as one. They used the same words. They were in agreement, even though they were of different species. Yes, the new mother said. We know their agreement is practiced, and they do not see patterns as we do. But they still seek such things in different ways. We find this an acceptable concession. But it's a lie, Tuum said. He could see Full look at him with concern, but he continued on. They do not truly agree. They merely pretend to, so as to maintain order. Like me. Oh, dead ones, take me, like me. The new mother looked hard at him. He trembled. There is more you wish to say, she said. Tuum shakily smacked his mouth. New mother, I do not wish to impose my thoughts upon yours. There is no need to worry. My thoughts are the stronger, and I value yours. I trust that we will find harmony. So, this is a genuinely great sci-fi depiction of like people who just don't get the idea of cooperating.
Yep. I mean, it's so perfect. Like, we finally, after all this time, get to see who the Turumika are, and they are the exact opposite of everything we've seen in all of our characters so far. Like, it not only in their misunderstand, like this is all just misunderstanding. This is misunderstanding of how cooperation works. Like this idea that you have a leader that speaks for you, and if you do not agree with everything that leader says, then your alliance cannot stand. Like, no, that's not how cooperation works at all. Like, we constantly disagree with each other. We have to come to some sort of consensus. And even if we come to a consensus, we don't necessarily agree with the consensus. And we listen to each other's disagreements, and we're not afraid to tell each other when we disagree or why or how. I mean, like, I pulled the slide, but we're going to compare this scene exactly with Ashby's testimony at the trial, which he is basically doing the same thing the Turemi character is doing here, but the outcome is entirely different because of the difference in the idea of cooperation and understanding of inclusion.
Yeah. Right. And you know, if I could speak to these aliens, I would say something like, look, the reason why you should cooperate with people you disagree with is that you can still have very powerful positive sum interactions and trades.
Yeah.
And other such relationships, even if you don't agree with fairly important things, you can still have positive sum relationships, and that's the basis for cooperation. Is not to sound like a broken record, but incentives. Like you there's a powerful incentive to agree, even if you have issues, and you can always work to try to find alignment, but
yeah,
you don't always have to have alignment to move forward.
But
it's like go ahead.
This is just an entirely might makes right civilization.
Right.
Like even that line, my thoughts are the stronger. There is no need to worry. Feel free to share your opinions. Mine are better anyway, so it doesn't affect me. It's such a horrifying way to cooperate.
Yeah, right. It's basically like the way their minds seem to work, or maybe it's their culture. I don't know. Is like agreeing with me is more important than anything you could possibly give me.
Yeah.
And that's like a recipe for disaster. It's very, I mean, I think it's very funny and ironic. I actually really enjoyed it when he said, let me see if I can find the line. So many different ideas all joined within a single clan. We did not see how such a thing could stand. And it's like, actually, it's the diversity within the GC that leads to its strength. And if everyone stood on their own, fighting for their own ideas, that wouldn't stand. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, and like textually with the Turemi, who are a group of people that are perpetually fighting amongst each other, like the whole concept of this civilization is either you agree with me or you kill me. Right. That's how it works. Like either everyone agrees or the most powerful person just kills the person that disagrees, and therefore then everyone agrees again. And that's not a way of actually utilizing like differences in opinion. Like that's the whole thing. Like him, even I think the basically the outcome of this whole conversation is they threaten to murder him if he keeps speaking up about his disagreement, and then he just decides to go blow up our friends and try to kill their ship. Right? I mean, this is like it's just a disaster, and I love that it's like everything. It's everything exactly the opposite of what we've seen throughout the entire book so far.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Okay, now we got to talk about Lovey, who we haven't talked about Lovey and Jenks yet, and this is the slide that we're gonna get to do it in, Matt.
Okay.
The rest of the crew stood behind him, all except Ohan, who had not left his bed since the punch. Sissix, Ashby, Rosemary, and Dr. Sheff all stood in a silent vigil near the doorway, wordless and tense. Corbin was there too, hanging back at the edge of the hallway. Jenks felt he should be grateful, but there was something uncomfortable about having all of them here in the place that had always belonged to him and Lovey. He felt naked, flayed. He didn't know if it would be better or worse to do this alone. He didn't know anything, nothing beyond the countdown on Kizzy's scrib and the one phase that kept pulsing through his mind. Lovey, wake up. Lovey, wake up. Lovey, wake up. 20 seconds, Kizzy said. She gave his hand a fast squeeze and met his eyes. There was something fierce there, as if she was trying to protect him just by looking. He reached out to the main control panel, to the 3 switches that he had only touched twice before. Once 3 standards back when we had installed Lovey, then again 9 minutes and 28 seconds ago. He took the first switch in his fingers. The mantra continued. Lovey, wake up. Lovey, wake up. Lovey, wake up. 15 seconds. 50% chance. Better odds than playing Flash, and he always wanted Flash. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7. Maybe the odds were better than that. Of course they were. They had to be. They had to be. Wake up. The hard clack of the switches echoed through the room. At first, nothing. That was okay. That was to be expected. He walked towards the core. The rest of the crew melted away, shadows in the corridor. There was nothing but him and the pale glow growing within the core, like a planet-side sunrise stretching through fog. The glow spread, blooming brightly, stretching out beyond the curved boundaries of the core. He could feel the faint edges of the warmth on his skin, inviting, familiar. There was a clicking near the ceiling as Lovey's cameras twitched themselves into new alignments. She was waking up. He knew that sound. He knew that glow. A tiny smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Lovey? There was a pause. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see the camera lenses shift towards him. She spoke. Hello. My name is Loveless. It's nice to meet you.
This is the saddest thing that happens.
It is incredibly sad, and to be honest with you, I'm so glad it went this way. I messaged this to you after the fact, but I was reading this, and there was a moment where I was like, they're gonna bring her back just fine, and I really hope the book doesn't go that way. I think this is a very optimistic book. I think we need to actually see some pain and
consequences.
Yeah, and it is of course awful, and I feel so bad for Jenks, and it's an incredibly touching moment. But I'm glad the book went here. I'm so glad it went here.
Yeah, me too. I mean, this was like the right thing to happen. I don't know what else to say. I think that it would have felt, indulgent if it had just been like, and then Lovey was fine, and everybody was fine, and everybody was happy, and nobody ever had to be sad. Like that just would feel kind of like, oh, okay, so this book just fundamentally it's just kind of feel good and kind of shallow. It's like, no, it went there when it had to.
Yeah.
And I mean, and also it's like, I think there's something to be said for the fact that the book, I almost said movie, is effectively making you feel sad, and it's making you feel sad over a ship's AI, which is, I'm not going to say this is the first time that I've ever felt sad about an artificial intelligence, because androids and replicants and all sorts of things are all over fiction, and I often feel sad when they're killed. Not that uncommon at all, actually, the idea of making you sad about an AI. But it is relatively rare to make you sad about an incorporeal ship's AI with no body.
Sure.
And the way that they did that was by making you really buy into the relationship with Jinx. So I like that.
I mean, we've talked about this on Kingslingers before, but just this idea that, character death does not affect you on its own. It affects you because of the way it affects other characters. And so the reason why this hits so hard for you is not because Lovey is dead. The reason this hits so hard for you is because Jenks has lost Lovey. Like that,
Yeah.
that is why it hits you, and that's
Right.
like that's why this was told from his perspective. I think the writing here is some of the best writing in the entire book. We're really in his head, like it's third person still, but it's as like close to first person as you can get. Where like this is basically his thoughts,
Yeah.
like just written down here. I think it's remarkable writing, and it makes the moment work very very well. I really enjoyed it. I loved. I loved, like, I think you're like the reason why this had to happen this way is because I think the idea of cooperation and inclusion, it's more than just look at the things we can accomplish together. It's when bad shit happens, you have people there for you,
Hmm.
and like people that have perspective and understanding and can bring their different ideas and cultures and beliefs to the suffering that you're having and can help you in a way that you couldn't do on your own. And I think that's why this had to happen, because we get to see we get to see the strength of the Kizzy and Jenks relationship with that beautiful scene where she's just like, you idiot, like, I'm not your friend, I'm your sister, like
Yeah.
we're family. You get to see the way all the other characters, like, I love the small touch of Corbin was there too. Like, he's not comfortable, but he recognizes this is an important moment for a member of his crew, and he's there too. Like, this is why cooperation and inclusion and diversity of opinion and voice matters. It's not just so we can do cool stuff together, it's so we can help each other when bad shit happens, because bad shit is still going to happen no matter what. People are going to die, we're going to lose things, it's going to be sad, but we're there for each other.
Yeah, and you don't really buy the strength of this family unless you see them dealing with something actually bad.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, it's all well and good to show them being happy and dealing with minor misunderstandings, and we're like, yeah, that's great, good for them. This is, but that there's a risk that that's just sappy if that's all there is to it. If it's, especially if it's fiction where we kind of need to see people suffer a little bit because we're
Yeah.
monsters.
Yeah, we are.
So
We're total
so
monsters.
we need to give them something to recover from that is meaningful, and
Yeah.
I think this is it's a good way of doing that. I love their name is Lovelace, like
Yeah.
Ada Lovelace, the famous programmer.
Mm-hmm. I the other thing about this I love, and I didn't pull the slide, is Lovelace's choice to go into a body and is entirely motivated by a concern and a care for Jenks that has nothing to do with their previous relationship. Like, this is basically a newly born entity that has no memory of the time before, but immediately has this innate understanding and
Hmm.
kindness to her, that they can just read a situation and understand and like immediately want to do the thing that is best for the other person, in spite of them not really being sure if it's the right thing for them. I find that really fascinating and encouraging, just as a human being that like wants the kindness of people to be their most important trait. Like, I just, it was really fascinated by like, and it's similar to like Lovey made that choice earlier in the book too, where like it's not that she didn't want to be in a body, it's just that she understood that was what Jenks wanted, and like it's the idea of putting someone else before yourself. And
Yeah.
it's so fascinating to see that trait continue in this new version of her, which again is nothing like that old version. Like, it's a different person, it's a completely new person, but this is a through line through all of our characters in the story, and I think it's great.
Yeah, the idea of putting others before yourself as being like the core principle of this AI was a really neat idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially, speaking again about the tendency for fiction and science fiction to go like dark and pessimistic. Like, I've read so many books where the AI is evil in some new and creative way, which I enjoy. I enjoy that, but like, it's fun to have the idea is like the AI is It's like perfectly Christ-like, actually. There's nothing you can criticize at all. I mean, the only criticism would even be like, shouldn't you you know care more about what you want, Lovey, instead of just only caring about what Jinx wants?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, no, that's not the way she's programmed. So
Well, I mean, I don't even want to say that's not the way she's programmed. That's not the way she is.
yeah,
Like,
and she can grow to be different. That was established too. So
yeah, yeah. I think this is kind of, again, Becky Chambers' innate optimism about humanity kind of coming through here, because I think one of the things that she's saying, and she said this earlier in the book, is the idea that even if humanity as a whole can be cruel, humans, individuals, are kind, compassionate, caring, so much to the point where this AI built by us, like in Becky Chambers' world, is it possible that there could be an evil AI? Sure, but like the idea of a created intelligence, like they're just, of course they're going to be kind and compassionate, because that's what people are. People are kind and compassionate. Look, the people around her are kind and compassionate. She's going to be kind and compassionate. That's just, I feel like this is just what Becky Chambers believes, and man, it makes me feel good. Like, I like that.
yeah,
I like that a lot.
yeah, me too.
Sorry, we haven't been paying attention to chat as much. We kind of got wrapped up in our conversation. Richard says that, to kind of circle back on the Teremi, I'm not sure if a civilization with this mentality could make it to their level of development. Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? That at some point, how did the Teremi advance to the point where they're able to travel through space with their obviously incredibly disruptive cultural system?
Maybe it just took him a super long time, or maybe they were in a sort of cultural arrangement where there was sort of a dictator who controlled everyone, and you know strictly enforced the agreement such that literally everyone was in agreement, and then they just killed everyone who wasn't, which was probably a pretty high turnover rate, but still a low enough turnover rate that they were able to have a technological civilization. But I mean, the thing is, I agree though, because like you can't build even a uh, you know electric motor if your principle for learning about the world is I'm right and you're wrong. Your principle has to be let's try it and see. Like, you have to have some humility in the face of just what is.
Sure.
So it makes it really hard for me to believe that a species would behave that way. But I'm willing to suspend disbelief for this.
Yeah, for the record, I am entirely fine with just yada yadaing over how that thing particularly worked, because I think this civilization works so much to drill the points of the novel home for me. So
Yeah.
yeah, John says scientific advancement usually comes from disagreeing with the status quo. Yeah.
Yeah. Richard points out that even when Lovey was hesitant to go into the body, she was still putting Jinx first, because she was like, I don't know if you really want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even if it was sort of against what he said he wanted, it's true though. I mean, she was always kind of watching out for Jinx, and I think ultimately it was interesting to see how kind of wrapped up in Lovey Jinx actually was. I sort of read it as a sort of escapism, and I'm not saying that it's not I'm not writing off the possibility of like a true meaningful romantic relationship between a human and an AI. But in the specific context of this book, Jinx seemed to be kind of like running away from the world and hiding in his relationship with this AI. I don't know. Did you get this vibe at all, or is this just me?
I know what you mean. I'm not sure I agree with you entirely. I think the problem I have is that I actually think, for all the end of this book hinges on Jinx's emotional devastation here, I actually think he's the character that gets the least amount of time to be explored in the book. I mean, I think like we get these really fascinating bits of information about his mother and who his mom is, and like what his background was growing up on Earth and why he's smaller than everyone else. But really, his defining characteristic is that he's in love with Lovey, and that's just about it. And I just feel like maybe we should have gotten a little bit more time with him and a little bit more time with Loveless as well, Lovey, I guess. Like we see them as inseparable in the story, and so we don't really understand them. So I understand why you got that feeling of this is just him retreating, because the only thing we really get is his relationship with Kizzy and then his relationship with Lovey, and that's it, really.
Yeah. I guess maybe I'm trying to explore why I feel this way in the first place. I think it's something like his sort of, love affair with Lovey is this thing that he's like keeping secret, and and um it's not a thing that seems healthy to me, because it's not like a shared life in the way that you would want a person. I guess that's why he wants to get her a body, though.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I guess I wasn't. It's not like I'm saying like, oh, Becky Chambers definitely wanted us to feel like this was an unhealthy thing. It was more like I didn't feel like it was necessarily a healthy thing.
yeah. I mean, they're like, it reminds me so much of the movie Her, in which I
Mhm.
think it is textually an unhealthy thing,
Yeah,
and that maybe that's where that's coming from. I think
maybe.
there is something to this idea that like their relationship, while real, is always hindered by the different spaces they occupy. Like they're never truly together, and I'm not just meaning physical. Like they live in literal different worlds,
Yeah.
and that creates this feeling of difference and isolation. I don't know. I
I
think. No, go
I
ahead.
mean, but just part of it that was getting to me was the fact that he was willing to just blow up his whole life for even a sort of long shot at a relationship.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
That struck me as kind of like obsessive in a bad way, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are like you talking about the secrecy of the relationship reminds me of the relationship between Ashby and Pei, who we
Mm.
really haven't talked about at all so far. That this interspecies relationship that they have to keep a secret because people just won't understand and it will be looked down upon. It's interesting because in both these relationships, both parties are extremely concerned about keeping it a secret, and yet everyone else on the crew knows about it anyway. Like
Mhm.
they all know about Lovey and Jenks, and they all know about Ashby and Pei. And of course, you can even say the relationship between Rosemary and Sissix, which is a relationship they try to keep secret, and everyone else knows about it as well. That's the recurring beat that like this desire to keep these things secret, and it's a waste of time.
Yeah, that's funny. I like that. That is a recurring beat.
Hmm.
That's great.
I mean, what do you think it says though? Like, I mean, are we exploring the idea of secrecy is ultimately unhealthy? I mean, the conclusion of the Ashby Pay relationship is, I'm gonna come spend my time off on your ship with you. I don't care what anyone says about it. Like, that seems to be like a. At the end of this experience, we've learned that being secretive about this thing is ultimately unhealthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is several different people who are, um, in conflict with themselves, because they're like, oh, I want to be, I don't want members of my own species, or I don't want to be stigmatized against, because that's painful, but I don't want to deny the part of myself that needs this specific kind of love.
Yeah.
um, and it manifests in, like you pointed out, at least those three different situations. And I think in all three different situations, the conclusion is always like, you can probably shoulder the burden of the stigma, and it's always going to be more painful for you to be secretive and running around, and everybody's going to find out about it anyway, so there's no point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's sort of a just, do what your heart tells you to do moral. It's the closest I think the book comes to having a moral, actually.
Yeah.
um
I do appreciate Chambers' choice to make those kind of interspecies relationships a stigma in this kind of society, right? It complicates, like, this is a melting pot of a society in which many species cooperate and coexist, and we don't ignore the fact that there's still going to be a lot of interspecies resentment,
uh-huh.
and some kind of stigma against
Yeah.
copulating within across species lines,
Yeah.
and I think it's really interesting that
I like the idea that like the Alien are so beautiful
yeah.
that they probably see humans as just like gross and disgusting monsters,
Yeah,
like the way we see like a weird alien or
like the slug alien people. Yeah.
yeah. And so the idea that she would be attracted to a man is actually kind of what's stigmatizing there.
Sure,
Um,
sure, sure.
so that was funny to me.
Hmm.
Um, all right, shall we move on?
Yes, let's do it.
So here, Ashby is brought to the council to testify as to what happened with the Taremi, and he says his piece. Policy, said Ashby, nodding. Right. He inhaled and looked down at his hands, resting on the too tall desk. I don't mean any disrespect, representatives, but your policies were supposed to protect me and my crew. I trusted in them. I trusted that we weren't going to be sent anywhere that posed any danger outside what comes with the job. He fought to keep his voice calm. You sent us somewhere we shouldn't have gone, and you're still thinking about sending other people back. You put all our lives at risk without saying as much, and now you want to sit around and talk about policies. Thank you, Captain, said the Quellan said flatly. That will be all. No, said the other Andrisk. Let him speak. He looked at Ashby and nodded. Like he said, he came all this way. Ashby swallowed, unsure of what had gotten into him. Go ahead, Captain, said the Aluan. Ashby took a breath. Look, I don't know about these things. I'm not a politician. I'm not on a committee. I don't know the things you know. I don't even know if my crew said anything to offend the Torimi. I didn't think they did, but no, I can't say for certain. But what if they did? Someone says something stupid at a cocktail party and that's enough to go to war over? Those are the kinds of people you want to bring into our space. You know, my ship nearly tore itself apart. I lost one of my crew. And yet, honestly, I'm glad there's not an open tunnel there right now. You want people like that who start killing that fast, walking around spaceports, flying through cargo lane traffic? How long before some shopkeeper gets killed over a price they didn't like, or a bar gets torn up because some drunk spacer mouths off about something that they don't agree on? He shook his head. I don't know why they attacked us. Thing is, neither do you. If you did, I wouldn't be here. So until you come up with a policy that can guarantee the Taremi will never fire on a civilian ship again, I think you should leave them the hell alone. The committee went quiet. Ashby looked down at the desk. The Aluan spoke. You said you lost one of your crew. Do you mean the AI? Yes, Ashby said. The Harmagian's tendrils flexed. Whatever it meant, Ashby didn't care. I see, said the Aluan. She looked at him a moment, her cheeks shifting colors in a contemplative way. Captain Santoso, could you wait outside for a few minutes?
So, as we kind of alluded to earlier, I think Chambers has set up this scene to mirror the scene between the Taremi soldier disagreeing with his mother, whatever, and the differing outcomes. I think are very important. Like he gives his disagreement with this whole thing, and what happens? They listen to him. They take a vote, and his side wins. Right? They decide that they're not going to pursue an allyship with this race for the time being. I think this, like, out of all the optimism in this book, this is the one thing I had the hardest time accepting, that like a economically advantageous partnership was denied over the safety of citizens. I was like, I just don't believe that the government would actually do that. But hey, it's science fiction.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's key to what the book is trying to say, and that like his freedom and the ability to consider his opinion and the perspectives of other people. I think it's very important that he's the only human here, right? Like, this is a diverse group of people who does not have, there are no human members on this council. There are no humans weighing into the decisions of this. And so he brings an outside perspective to this whole thing, and it changes enough people's mind that they decide to go a different way. That is how cooperation and community and inclusion, that's how these things work. That's how these things are successful. We listen to people and we allow those ideas to change our minds in some ways. And even so, I think the vote is not unanimous, right? It barely passes. There are still people that disagree. There are dissenting opinions on the right way forward, but that's how it works. That's how it works.
Yeah, there has to be dissent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that I buy this organization as being sufficiently Starfleet-like that I can buy that, like, they're their values are the values of, you know, these people. They're they're humanists, they're personists, I suppose.
But what about that money, though?
I mean, I think the thing is they like this is the closest I can get to kind of approximating a truly evolved morality is like actually being like, yeah, sure, there's a lot of money in it, but it's gonna make everybody miserable, and thus I shouldn't do it. And it's like, most people wouldn't make that call, but maybe maybe in some future world
There's just
where
enough people.
what?
There's just enough people to make
Yeah,
that call. There's just
yeah,
enough.
there's just
Yeah.
enough people. Yeah, right.
I'm all for it. I mean, I'm thrilled that that's the way it went. But I was just like, but what about that money, though?
I feel you. I mean, when they chose to side with him, I was kind of like, yeah, that would never really happen. But again, we're just like that's the conceit of the story. So I feel you totally.
Sure, sure, sure. Of course, the other little bit in this is that I love. So I don't know if you picked up on this. I love this. He is sitting outside the room waiting to be called in, and the AI is there, and he's talking to the AI and treating the AI like a person, and the AI like doesn't know how to react to it. And then by the end of the interaction, when he's sent outside to wait, the AI talks to him, and the AI is so much more friendly with him and like wishes him he has a good day, and I feel like the AI was affected seriously by the words he said in here. And I mean, this kind of goes to what Richard is saying in chat right now. The reason for the second class citizen status of AI in this world is never clear to them. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things where that's just kind of Becky Chambers just kind of decided that like this world has not come to accept AI quite yet,
Yeah.
but because of the perspective of this group of people, to do that, perhaps that's the beginning of the shift in mindset that will change the world. You know?
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm reminded of the bit where Lovey herself is saying like a non-sentient AI is just a beast of burden,
Mm-hmm.
which you wouldn't hesitate to employ. And it's like, to me, I'm immediately like, well, how do you distinguish between a sentient and a non-sentient AI? Like we have no idea how to classify between a sentient and a non-sentient
Sure,
anything.
that's a good point. Yeah.
And so like, I mean, my intuition is always if something tells you it's a person and begs for its life, probably shouldn't kill it. Which means that pretty soon we're probably going to have AIs that I would consider a person. But that's a tangent. Anyway,
Have you watched The Good Place yet?
no, I haven't.
So there's this is, I guess, slight spoilers. There's AI character in The Good Place.
Okay.
And she has a reset button that you can use to reset her, but she's programmed to where whenever you get within a certain amount of distance from the reset button, it triggers the beg for her life mode, and she just starts like screaming like, please no, don't kill me. And then like so, there's a scene where like she'll say, when you're like 6 feet away, she'll be like, you get any closer and I am going to beg for my life, but just to reassure you, it is not real, it is just a program, I have no feelings, I don't worry about anything. And then they step forward, it's like, no, please, no. It's wonderful.
Well, I'm sorry that would work on me.
It would, yeah. I mean, it works on them too. It's really
Yeah.
effective. Yeah,
It's hilarious.
Janet. Yeah, Janet is the name of the character. You should watch Good Place. Yeah.
It's pretty brilliant actually.
Mm-hmm. All right. We want to finish this book off?
Let's finish it.
Ready? Sissik said. 1, 2, 3. They stepped out and fell up, or down, or sideways. It didn't matter. Those words meant nothing anymore. There were no boundaries, no playroom walls. Her body was freed of the burden she hadn't known she was carrying. Solid bones, dense muscle, an unwieldy head. They were out in the open, for real this time, as spacers should be. And all around them, black, 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 full of jeweled stars and colored clouds. It was a sight she knew well, a sight she lived alongside, but in that moment she was seeing it for the first time. Everything had changed. Oh, stars, Rosemary said, and suddenly understood the expression better than she ever had. Come on, Sissik said. The thrusters on her boots fired. They flew further out. Rosemary looked back to the Wayfarer. Through the windows, she could see the familiar rooms and corridors, but it was all so different from out here. Like watching a vid or looking into a dollhouse. The ship looked so small, so fragile. Rosemary. She turned her head. Sussex raised their clasped hands and smiled. Let go. She let Sissok's curved fingers slip from her grasp. They drifted apart, still holding the other in their eye. Rosemary turned away from her ship, away from her companion, turned out and faced the void. There was a nebula there, an explosion of dust and light, the fiery corpse of an ancient giant. Within the gaseous folds slept clusters of unborn stars, shining softly. She took inventory of her body. She felt her breath, her blood, the ties binding it all together. Every piece, down to the last atom, had been made out here, flung through the open in a moment of violence, until they had swirled round and round, churning and coalescing, become heavy, weighing each other down. But not anymore. The pieces were floating free now. They had returned home. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. It's great.
It's great. And, thanks again. I think it was John who pointed out that the beginning mirrors the end, except now, because, she was not only floating in space, but she had no windows. Now she can see that space is actually this beautiful, beautiful place full of the signs of how everything is connected and how all these, you are part of the cosmos, and far from being a moment of isolation, it's a moment of profound spiritual unity with everything, and it's great.
Yep. I love that. Every piece down to the last atom had been made out here, flung through the open in a moment of violence, until they had swirled round and round, churning and coalescing, becoming heavy, weighing each other down. But not anymore. This is home. This is freedom. This is life. And I mean, I love the moment, the let go moment. I think is so important, right? I mean, it mirrors her first handshake with Sussex earlier in the book, and it's also like she's still connected to these people. These people are like, I love that she turns away from the Wayfarer to see everything. Like, she is part of the family. She is part of the Wayfarer. She is in a relationship with Sussex. These are all important relationships to her, but there's something so much bigger and so much more than just those things. The Wayfarer is just a ship. It's just a small, fragile ship. These are just small, fragile people. There's something bigger than all of this, and it's everything. It's the world. It's the universe. It's the interconnected nature of everything. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It is. It's great. It was very nice. It was a very nice book. It left me with a happy feeling.
Yeah.
Well written, well put together. I'm wondering what will stick with me. I guess I'll say that. I bet some of this will. I bet some of this will stick with me. I'm just not sure what exactly. Probably the parts that seemed fresh and new to me will, honestly.
Sure.
And maybe some of the characters.
That's a good question for the audience. Folks out there, as you're relaying your questions for the Q&A to us, here's my question to you. What is going to stick with you most out of this book? What are you going to take away from it? What are you going to remember 5 years from now about your experience with this book?
Yeah.
Good question. I like it. I don't know. I don't know what's going to stick.
I like something Sophie said in reference to our conversation about the idea of secrecy. They say secrecy from people who don't understand or would be dangerous to the relationship is understandable, but perhaps there should be no secrets from your found family. And that is sort of what the book settles on, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah. Tringard asked, do you think Rosemary got the message about how the Toremi work they're hearing when we did, or did that actually arrive after the incident? That's an interesting question. We have not talked about the structural conceit of this novel that uses kind of epistolary sections of emails or messages coming in to fill in information. One of them, actually, before we meet the Toremi, is a message about that they have super good hearing and and the ability to isolate sounds. So, and that of course leads to their downfall, because the one pilot is able to pick up what they're saying when they're off in the corner talking about this whole thing. That's a good question. I don't know if she just forgot or she hadn't received it yet. I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my take was like we're supposed to know that, but Rosemary isn't.
But it was it was a missive sent to her from her friend, her archivist friend Bear. I think.
I mean, I think she didn't see it.
Okay.
I think she just didn't see it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That was just my assumption.
John says, I think maybe the quandary with Ohan and the amount of thought I put into it is what he's going to take away from it. Yeah, I think that's something that, like, and I mean, I love that I don't have an answer to it that I'm satisfied with yet. I love that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it says failed delivery, John says on the missive. Okay, okay.
Ah, okay.
There we go.
Yeah, the other piece of epistolary stuff that I liked a lot was just like somebody's speech about how humans didn't deserve to be part of the GC and should be
Yeah.
ejected
Yeah,
because we suck so bad.
I like that.
That was great.
Yeah.
Um,
Sophie says, I read this a while ago and I remember the feeling I got from it, kind of like a warm hug crossed with comfort food. For me, it was the feelings between the book and reader and characters much more than the plot.
mhm.
So that's what Sophie was left with.
Yeah.
Richard says, it's been a while since I read it and I agree with Sophie, the warm feeling. So see, that's what is remarkable about story is like the details of the story is always going to fade away from you. Like whether you read it once and didn't talk about it, or for example, you did a 50-part podcast on it. Like the details of Worm have faded from me a little bit. I don't remember everything with the clarity I remembered it the first time we did that story, but the emotions, the feelings I got at certain points stay with me, and I think that is absolutely true about this book as well.
Yeah. The high points, the impactful points.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Aaron says that they really liked the idea that for whatever reason all of the life forms are somewhat similar, and we're not like I agree. I like that as sort of a almost disconnected from everything else. The little essay on just like,
yeah,
all right, look, you may have noticed that there are like dinosaur aliens and insect aliens and bird aliens, and I, the author, also noticed that, and I'm just gonna say that the universe likes to make life forms take on shapes in similar patterns and get
yeah,
over it.
yeah. This idea that that's just a law of nature in our universe, that life tends to look similar to this. I love that it like pokes fun at the seeding theory, which is I think that's just, it's just straight mocking Star Trek in that regard, because I think that's textually how life in
Yes.
Star Trek all looks the same, right? That all races were seeded.
All the sentience were, at least, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Although it's funny, I there was one Star Trek original series novel that I read when I was a kid, where like Kirk is just like musing to himself about the fact that like 99% of the intelligent races of the galaxy are bipedal, look like people wearing makeup, but like 1% are like horrible black worms or something that like are basically impossible to communicate with because they don't even speak at all.
mm-hmm.
And he just kind of passingly thinking about this bizarre fact of existence, and then going on to take his shirt off, I presume. um, Presumably that author just made that up entirely, because I don't remember any. I guess there was the black sludge monster in TNG.
Look, man, the whole Star Trek never had a lot of money, and it's just easier to put bumpies on people and call them aliens.
Yeah, I know.
John says, if Andarisk wore clothes, do you think they would have sheaths for their tails or let them hang out sleeveless? I think they just let it hang out.
Just let it hang out. They probably have a
that
special kind of cut for the tail.
Yeah.
Yes, there's also beings of pure energy in Star Trek. There's Qs. There's beings of crystal.
Yeah, but
that
like
eat
that,
life.
that's like the next generation stuff.
Actually, there's really no indication that the crystalline entity was sentient, so I take that one back.
I was thinking about the original series episode where they find a silica-based life form, and Jim is like, Bones, it's dying. Operate on it. And Bones is like, I don't know how to do that. We're carbon-based. I have no idea how to treat this thing. And he's just like, just do it. And then so he does and saves it.
I love Star Trek.
Yeah. It's so good. I love it so much. Okay. Kirk asked, do you make anything of how the Aulon are found beautiful by every other species except the Teremi? Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a great way of visually like showing how different from every species of the GC. They really are.
Yeah, exactly. Right. They don't find the idea of these shiny, beautiful fish people to be. Yeah, one thing, just minor thing, but I like the Eloan, the fact that they like basically speak with color flashes on their cheeks, and they like basically can't lie because they're basically like their emotions are always basically transparent on their cheeks.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool. I was like, oh yeah, I could kind of buy that actually.
Do they still breathe oxygen? I think they do, right?
I think they did. Yeah, it was just that they just didn't speak for whatever reason.
I
Yeah,
have a
they didn't
hard
have
time
vocal
believing
cords.
a species that breathes oxygen would not make sounds.
There was the whole other thing about just the fact that all of the species breathe basically the same mix of oxygen, and that's the other thing where it's like, just get over it.
Yeah,
All the
just
aliens are basically similar, and
deal with it. Yeah.
it's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Sophie asks, would you read the sequels? Interesting. Yeah, I'm not gonna say no to that. I don't think I'm gonna like prioritize the sequels and be like, I need to put aside all the other books I have to read and read these sequels right away. But I would definitely be interested in checking out other stories in this world. Yeah. How about you, Matt?
Um, maybe. I don't know.
See, my to be read list is like this tall, so
Yeah, right. I'm trying not to just kind of like weasel out by saying like I never really read the sequels to things in book club, even if it's stuff that I liked. I think it's happened like once that I've read a sequel to a book club book, um, and that's so the odds are four.
what? Why do you think that is? Is it specific to book club, or is it just you don't tend to read sequels to books you read?
Um, I think it's just I don't know. I don't really have a good explanation. I guess I figure I'm always gonna have like way too much to read anyway. Like
Yeah,
we're always reading like a Dark Tower book and a book club book at the same time, all
that's
the
true.
time, always, forever, for the rest of my life, based on the calendars that you've made. So I don't feel any need to pick up the sequel to anything in particular. That I think that's really what it is. It's like my reading docket is actually quite well spoken for.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read more books than you generally, but I agree. Um,
Yeah. Scott's holding up the two books that we're reading right now, and
the
they're
two giant fucking books that we're reading
uh-huh.
right now. Yeah. Speaking of which, speaking of reading sequels to books we covered in book club, hey, what's happening next month?
What's happening next month? I don't know, Scott. What is happening next month? You
Well,
tell me.
what happened is a month ago we had a vote between these two books right here, and then they tied, and so that meant that we did this one. I'm putting a book in front of my face, which means I'm not talking to the microphone, which is bad. We did this one, but now we gotta do this one, and this one's a lot bigger than this one.
It's a lot bigger
It's
because
a,
what is it? I'm just gonna say what it is now. It's Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson.
Yay!
The sequel to
The Way of Kings.
The Way of Kings, the second book in the Stormlight Archive series.
Yes, so we are going to be reading this book. So last month we talked about kind of trying to figure out how we're going to approach this. With the first book in the series, we divided it over 2 months and we had 2 episodes. I don't think either of us were really thrilled with the way that went. It kind of just like, the first episode just kind of, frankly, it kind of sucked. It was just like us saying, hey, I'm not enjoying this, but it could get better in the end.
Yeah.
And then the second book was saying, hey, it kind of got better in the end.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to do that again. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna
rip off the first half of the book and just read the second half.
we're going to try to read this all in 1 month and have one book club talking about this. It might be a little bit longer than our normal book clubs, which frankly I don't know how you could get any longer. This was a short book and we've been going for an hour and a half, so 2.5 hours. We're gonna just try to do it in one, and we're gonna see how that's gonna go. So we are going to be reading this entire book in the next month. Because book club was delayed a week this month, it's only 3 weeks until the last Friday of the month. And because it's such a long book, we're going to delay it another week to give y'all a little bit more time and frankly give us a little bit more time to read it. So book club is going to be on September 3rd, the first Friday of September, not the last Friday of August. Give everyone an extra week to get through this book. So that's what we're going to do. And we'll see how it goes.
Sounds good.
Trinkart says, I think it was the right choice to go Foucault's Pendulum, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and then Words of Radiance. Yeah, that's a interesting. This is what I love about book club. We go all over the place.
All over the place in terms of content and tone and book length and genre.
Yeah.
Ah, it's great.
The thing is, Matt, I've long wanted to do some books for book club that are a bit longer. Like I really want to do a Lonesome Dove episode with you. I really want to do a House of Leaves episode with you. These are really long books, and I've always been afraid because I don't know how book club and long books are going to mesh. So I'm kind of using this book as a testing ground to see how that's going to go. So we'll see how this episode goes, and we'll make some decisions on there.
Sounds good.
I don't know. But that is the plan for next month, Friday, September 3rd, 9:30 p.m. Brandon Sanderson, Words of Radiance. Brandon Sanderson himself will be here. That's not true. I made that up. But now I've said it. You got to wonder.
In spirit, through his words, he'll be here.
Through the words of radiance.
Oh, my God.
So Sophie is asking, I'm not familiar with book club. How does the short list get selected? That is a good question. So if you go to our website and you click on the book club, in the description of what the book club is, there will be a link. We allow everyone to submit books for consideration. And then once a month, Matt and I will go through the list and pull 5 books. And then we will put up a poll for our patrons to vote on which books they want to cover. And that's how we decide. And then I think twice a year, Matt and I just get to pick a book ourselves. We have a We Pick 'em. Where we just get to select a book ourselves. And then I select Ghost Story, and no one comes to the book club, and I'm sad for a whole month. But
yes,
that's how we do it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, as for how those shortlist books for the voter are selected, it's just me and Scott going, yeah, I want to read that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And then sometimes going, no, that sounds terrible. But we don't tell those people. So basically, feel free to submit as many books as you want. Submit multiple times if you want. We go through them, we cull them down, and we pick the 5 based on those. But that's how we pick them. So
yep.
I believe that link is in the every episode of the book club as well. So if you're looking for the link to submit, I'm just gonna share it in the chat right here. If I can find it. I actually don't know where it is. Book club submission form. There it is. But this is the way to edit the submission form. I don't want to send that one.
Well, we'll be sure that it's in the episode notes for this episode at the very least.
Yes. Hopefully I'm afraid to send this because I don't know.
Yeah, let's just put it in the episode notes.
Yeah, I'm just going to do that. Because I've done this before and accidentally set the editable one, and then people just edited it and broke it.
Yeah, putting links in the chat is always squirrely anyway.
Mm-hmm. Bishop says, do you remember Way of Kings well? No. I'm debating just going and listening back to our episodes on that and seeing if that's a good way. But there's probably a quicker recap to do.
Yeah, I think I remember it well enough, honestly, but I also think that Sanderson's probably going to catch me up with the important stuff,
Do you think that?
I think he's pretty good at doing that, actually, when it comes to books in his series.
Hey, Matt, let me ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
Name one character in the Stormlight Archive. Give me one character's name.
Kelsier.
No. No.
Hold on, I got it. Shalon.
Yeah, okay, you got it.
I just pronounced it as badly as possible.
Oh, that's okay, John. It's my fault, not yours. If you're covering the whole book in one episode, are you going for a longer stream? Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. We'll see. It depends on, how much we have to say about this book. Didn't you hate her? Yeah. Yeah, we
I
kind of did.
did. I did hate her, and
Matt
I still
hated her
do.
more than I do, but I didn't.
I still think often about how much I hate her. Can't
Let
wait
me.
to read this book. All
Let,
right.
wait, do you really think that often about it? That's
No,
worrisome, Matt.
no, no, I don't. No, I don't.
We're gonna wrap things up here, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out, everyone. It was so fun as always. These are always the highlight of my month, so we appreciate you all being here to chat, and we look forward to seeing you next month with Words of Radiance. So that's it. That's it. For those of you listening at home, of course you're all listening at home. That's a weird thing to say. For those of you listening to the after the fact audio of this episode, hopefully you will make it out next month and chat with us live. We love doing this. We love having y'all here to chat with, so try it out, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, then please head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating to support our organization. At any available level, you will get access to vote for the books we talk about each month, as well as a bunch of other exclusive features. So please go check that out.
Yeah, exclusive features like Matt talking about video games again
2 months in a row.
without me again. And Matt can attest to this, where I was just responding to his episode in Google Chat as I was listening to it, incredulously, like, no, you're wrong about this. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong about this.
You had your chance.
Well, I didn't know you were going to run it back and then say some more wrong things. That's not my fault.
That's why I have my own platform, Scott, so I can contradict you freely.
Okay. All right. Well, that is it for us. Thank you so much. And we will see you all next month with some more Brandon Sanderson. Hold on. Let me check. Is there a prologue in this book? Let me just acknowledgments, content, book 2. Is it? Fuck. We'll see you next month.
That was perfect.
Uh-huh. All right, folks. I think sometimes we hang out after the recording has stopped, but my eye is driving me fucking crazy.
It's very late. It's very late, and our eyes hurt. I think we're gonna each end up with one eye, and it's gonna be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, our powers combined, we can see in 3 dimensions.
Yeah. we're a podcaster pair.
All right, folks. That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for putting that book up and voting on it and everything. It was a fun read, and we appreciate y'all. So hopefully we'll see you next month. Brandon Sanderson ones are, for some reason, always really popular, so we hope to see all of you back next month. We're going to go to bed and maybe put some eye drops in our eyes.
Good night, everybody.
Catch y'all later. Have a good night.